Chapter 1024. Qin Yu drank 2 jars of strong wine, but his expression did not change. He was still the same. Other than the fact that his aura was a little uneven, no one could tell anything else about him. Just now, he had drunk 2 jars of unimaginable strong wine in one go. Although the price of this kind of wine was not extremely high, it was not cheap. Shushur did not lack wealth, and he also wanted top-grade wine. If these 2 jars of strong wine were placed on someone else, it would probably be enough to drink for half a year. Usually, it would be enough to drink 1 or 2 cups. If he drank more, he would be drunk. However, Qin Yu drank 2 jars of wine effortlessly. Part of it was because of his high strength, but his alcohol tolerance was not to be underestimated. Akira Kaneko clicked his tongue. Was there anything in this world that Qin Yu could not do? If his strength was extremely high, then it would be fine, but from the looks of it, his alcohol tolerance was actually so high. Moreover, he was forthright and magnanimous enough. Akira Kaneko's blood rose in his heart, and he opened 2 more jars without any explanation. By the time the moon was high in the sky, there were more than 20 empty wine jars beside their table. Shushur had already collapsed, and Akira Kaneko relied on his strength to drink much more than ordinary people. He had held on until now, but after drinking 7 or 8 jars of strong wine in a row, he could not hold on any longer. His consciousness was muddled, and he was completely relying on his last breath to hold on. He barely did not faint, but his words were also vague, and it sounded like he was talking nonsense. It was obvious that he was drunk to the point of being unconscious. Qin Yu drank 2 servings of wine by himself. So whenever he drank, others drank 1 jar of wine, and he drank 2 jars of wine. Most of the 20 or so jars on the ground were contributed by him. Now that the moon was high in the sky, although it was not as lively as during the day. But there were quite a few people who came out at night, and all of them came out to drink. So not only did the business in the restaurant not worsen, but it also improved. It was just that they had been sitting here for nearly half a day, so it was inevitable that they would attract attention. People came and went, and they would all look at the large pile of empty wine jars on the ground with surprised eyes. They did not dare to imagine who was so powerful. How could he drink so much wine in one go? Especially Qin Yu from the beginning to the end. Even now, he had drunk more than 10 jars of strong liquor. If it was an ordinary person, they would have long been drunk and unconscious. It was normal for him to be drunk for 10 days and 10 nights. However, even now, Qin Yu was only able to see that he was slightly drunk. The smell of alcohol on his body was very strong. But that was only because of the surrounding environment and the smell of the wine. He didn't look like someone who had drunk more than a dozen jars of strong liquor. On the contrary, it was as if he had just drunk a cup of wine and was slightly contaminated with the smell of alcohol. Akira Kaneko was so drunk that he hugged half a jar. He swayed and wanted to continue drinking. One mouthful after another, he continued to drink until it got stuck in his throat. Before he could say anything, he had already passed out on the table. This time, he was finally drunk. After getting drunk, no one knew when a person would wake up. Someone still needed to clean up this mess. But this time, the drinking was quite enjoyable. These 2 people were the kind of people who could be friends with. And this time, when they were drunk, Qin Yu could be said to have gotten a lot of information from them. It was about the local customs of the Gold Realm. It was about their respective family forces. It was also because of this that he found out that Akira Kaneko was not only an undefeated god of war. Unexpectedly, there was also a hidden family force behind him. The reason why he came out to fight for this name was only to train himself. He didn't really need these false names. In this way, people could also understand why he could be so unscrupulous. He came and went as he pleased. As soon as Qin Yu left, he would be able to follow him. It was because he had a backer behind him. It was because of his reputation. It was also because of the force he represented. A real big shot would not make things difficult for him over such a small matter. He also had a certain understanding of the existence behind him. He would not cause him big trouble for no reason. They're all drunk. Look, they've drunk more than 10 jars of wine, but they're still not drunk. That's not all. They don't even look like they've drunk more than 10 jars of wine. Could it be that this person grew up soaking in wine jars? How can he drink so much? They who opened restaurants had been in restaurants for a long time. This high-quality liquor was soaked in wine jars by their own people since they were young. They definitely couldn't drink more than Akira Kaneko. One had to know that martial artists at least drank a lot of alcohol. It was used to strengthen their courage and warm their bodies. In short, their alcohol tolerance was also honed since they were young. In addition, it was because of their strength. Even those who had started drinking since they were born, they couldn't drink more than Akira Kaneko. They had never seen Shinyu before. They couldn't imagine what it would be like if someone had such a high alcohol tolerance. They naively thought that no one in this world could drink. There were more than 10 jars of high-quality liquor. Their liquor was not ordinary liquor. It was more intoxicating than ordinary liquor. Generally speaking, 10 jars was already the limit. Even some super strong people, under the power of 10 jars of liquor, they definitely couldn't stay sober. However, now they saw an exception that made them feel how ignorant and ill-informed they were. He turned a deaf ear to those discussions. Shinyu didn't have any intention of showing mercy to the fairer sex. He pulled one person in each hand and directly dragged them outside by the collar. Anyway, all of them had rough skin and thick flesh. They seemed to be able to withstand the rubbing. Not to mention just rubbing against the ground a little, they took a few punches. It wouldn't be a big deal. So much so that after drinking the hangover soup and taking some pills that could relieve the hangover, when they woke up, the two of them felt a little sore all over their bodies. But they didn't think in other directions. Perhaps the soreness all over their bodies was just the result of a hangover. Shualon couldn't help but laugh, but she didn't kindly remind them. Seeing them walk down with sore backs, she thought about it again and again. After considering Chinyu, she finally prepared something for them to relieve the soreness. If one were to consider it as being rather considerate, this was especially true when Shualon spoke to everyone other than Chinyu bluntly. It was rare for her to have such good intentions, which made the two of them feel a little flattered. But they knew very well that Shualon was only doing it for Chinyu's sake. We really troubled you yesterday. I actually had to rely on you to pull the two of us back from that tavern. Otherwise, the two of us would probably have to sleep on the streets and be unconscious for 3 days and 3 nights. One had to know that the people in the tavern weren't so kind. If they had a hangover, they would be directly kicked out after the door was closed. Chapter 1025. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. When the time came, no one would give them hangover soup or pills to sober them up, but they would have to wander the streets in a half-awake state. After a few days, they would wake up from their drunken stupor. Their lodgings were not exactly hidden. After a day and night of fermenting, the situation had escalated again. After all, many people had died. Not only the death of the Tianyuan beast, but some people had also suffered a great loss. No one had stood up for Qinghai for the time being, but the Guo family had come knocking on their door. Normally, the Guo family's way of doing things could be considered extremely overbearing, and even Akira Kaneko would not provoke these local tyrants for no reason. Akira Kaneko's family was quite powerful. There were always things that they could not do in places that they could not reach. For example, provoking the local tyrants was something that would only bring them more harm than good. The Guo family was not very powerful in other areas. However, in this area, he could be considered to have some ability, and they had a little bit of face. It was enough to make people see them in a new light, under the circumstances of possessing such an ability. If Chinyu were to confront them directly, in the eyes of others, his chances of winning would be slightly lower. After all, they had drunk together and had drunk so much. They had some friendship. Even if it was for this new friend, Akira Kaneko would not let them come knocking on his door like this. He was ready to deal with it himself. Since this is my own business, I should deal with it myself. Chinyu stopped Akira Kaneko, who wanted to stand up for him. He smiled and walked out of the door. Akira Kaneko wanted to help him deal with it, but suddenly he thought about it. Chinyu was much stronger than him. It was still uncertain who would be the one to gain the upper hand in this matter. Although the Guo family still had some face, they still had some face. But strength was the most important thing. If he had enough strength, he would not have to be afraid of anyone. How could he forget about this matter? However, Qin Yu's attack made him somewhat worried. This worry was not towards Qin Yu. Instead, it was towards the Gua clan's people who had come to find them. Would they be able to walk out of here alive and unharmed? This was an extremely mysterious matter. The Gua clan's current Grand Elder used to have some face in front of some experts in the Qianyuan gladiator arena. Old man Gua still had some respect for him. However, he was a little older after all, and he already had the intention to hand over this network and help to his youngest son. But his youngest son suddenly died at the most critical moment of his training. Just like that, he had died in the hands of an unknown person for no apparent reason. Even if Qin Yu's strength was extremely high, he still had to come and seek justice. He also knew in his heart that his youngest son was not someone who could become a talent. He was simply a pile of mud that couldn't be supported by a wall. However, he was still his son after all. It was better to nurture his favorite son. No matter what, he couldn't allow others to interfere. One could imagine the fury in his heart. The rest of the family did not approve of his actions. They felt that this matter needed to be carefully considered. However, for his youngest son Guoliang's corpse, he hurriedly rushed over. He suppressed all the criticism with his own strength. He thought of ways to find Qin Yu. Although there were other people around, he didn't care about them anymore. His youngest son's death was more important in his heart. Everything else wasn't important at all. I want you to pay for my son's death with your life. My poor Liang. Perhaps it was because of his age that he was particularly muddle-headed. If it was when he was young, he would definitely not be like this. But now his strength obviously couldn't be raised to a higher level. His life was getting shorter and shorter, and his love for this son of his had surpassed everything else. As for what kind of consequences this would bring to him, he no longer cared about others. In his eyes, Qin Yu was just a person who came from an unknown god realm. As long as he firmly grasped this point, he wasn't afraid that he would fall into the hands of a stranger. Akira Kaneko frowned as he watched this scene. But because of his understanding of Qin Yu's strength, he didn't say anything. Although the old master of the Gua family was quite strong now and had some prestige. But that was all. Even Shenzhen had some difficulty dealing with an existence of his realm. For Qin Yu, wasn't he someone who could be defeated easily? But Ming sure didn't know this. Seeing that this guy opened his mouth and said that he would pay with his life, he also recognized his origin. But he didn't have any good feelings in his heart. Thinking that Qin Yu didn't seem to have any status. She had never heard of the existence of Qin Yu and Xiulan. So she walked out and blocked everyone's view. Old Master Guo looked at the familiar person in front of him and frowned with a headache. Many people didn't want to offend this girl. After all, offending this girl would not only bring a lot of trouble to oneself. At the same time, it would also be equivalent to offending that narrow-minded guy in Shanghai. The gains didn't make up for the losses. But after all, his favorite youngest son was already dead. Thinking of the appearance of Guo Liang's corpse and the news that he had inquired about, Old Master Guo couldn't hold back his anger. He waved his hand and asked a group of guards to pull Ming Shi to the side. This was his business. This time, he had steeled his heart and was determined to make a fuss about it. He definitely wouldn't let anyone disrupt his plan. A life for a life. This seemed to be a matter of course in his opinion. But he didn't think about the time when he had killed someone. He didn't think that there was such a thing as a life for a life. But in this world, only the powerful had the right to speak. For old Master Gua, there was nothing wrong with his way of thinking. What's wrong with this world? Why are they here to arrest us for no reason? Moreover, they're talking about fighting and killing. The arena didn't even say a word. The order in the Gold Realm also had certain rules. It wasn't as disorderly as it seemed on the surface. If it was a personal dispute, naturally, no one would care. As for whether there would be a few more corpses, no one would care at all. But things like this were big enough. It also involved some people with powerful backgrounds, so it would attract attention. Logically speaking, someone should stand up and take care of this matter at this time. But Ming Shi didn't see anyone come to take care of it. He was even taken to the side. No matter how angry he was, it was troublesome for him to face so many people alone. According to your rules, This world seems to respect the strong. Since the strong are respected, this matter has become simple. Chapter 1026. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation set up a venue for a duel. After all, only the strong are respected. If I win, I'll have the most say in this matter. No one expected Qin Yu to propose such a solution. Even old Guo did not expect this. After thinking about it carefully, this solution was not impossible. For a moment, he laughed heartily. In any case, this method was already an excellent choice for him. Since you proposed it, I'll add one more condition. You shouldn't have anything to say. Why don't we fight to the death? After all, the matter between us is very complicated. If we fight to the death, it might be more troublesome. Whether we fight to the death or not, it's a good solution for both of us. He was worried that he could not think of a way to make this matter seem reasonable. If he could protect his reputation, of course, it would be better to protect his reputation. Now, this was already an excellent solution. Qin Yu took the initiative to propose a duel to the death. As long as these words were added, no matter what he did, it would seem reasonable. Even if he accidentally killed someone, it would be their own business. No one could interfere. Moreover, if this matter spread out, no one could say anything about it. Even if they knew that there was something fishy going on, no one would dare to say anything about it. If he thought about it carefully, this solution could not be better. For a moment, he actually found Qin Yu pleasing to the eye. Even if Qin Yu was the culprit who killed his favorite son. But he was happy, and everyone was pleasing to the eye. It was a stark contrast from when he first came. Only a very small number of people knew how big this matter was. They had all seen Qin use strength with their own eyes. He killed the Tianyuan beast with ease. Even if the Tianyuan beast was seriously injured, and he could not use all his strength. However, his casual manner still left an extremely deep impression on them, especially Akira Kaneko. At least, he did not think that he had that kind of ability. This meant that Qin Yu's strength was at least above his. Under such circumstances, old man Liang's strength had not improved despite his age. How could he possibly unleash his full strength? At that time, he would be shooting himself in the foot. After all, he was the one who suggested it. At that time, Qin Yu would really kill him regardless of whether he lived or died. No one could say anything about it. All right, life or death. Under the two old men's calculations, under Jin Xiao's contemplation, was it? Qin Yu didn't seem to be thinking about anything. At least, no one could tell what he was thinking. Both of them believed that their thoughts were correct. However, no one could tell what Qin Yu was thinking. Private duels like this, regardless of life or death. With the agreement of both parties, they could also arrange for an empty spot in the gladiator arena. This was to give them enough space so that they could have a good competition venue. Since it was a public event, there would naturally be other people watching. But this time, it had caused quite a commotion. Not to mention that there were no empty seats. Most of the seats were also filled. As a result, it was extremely noisy during the competition. It seemed to be no different from a normal gladiator fight. Even a casino was built. Naturally, they were betting on who would win. Moreover, the odds were actually not too far off. Most people thought that the two old men would win. That was because the previous matter was not directly announced. There were also a small number of people who had watched the previous competition. Having seen Qin use strength with their own eyes, they naturally had doubts about the final result. After thinking for a long time, they finally decided to take a gamble. They bet that Qin Yu would win. Anyway, they didn't put in a lot of money. It would be fun to win, and it wouldn't be a pity to lose. Akira Kaneko was watching this gamble from the periphery. Without saying a word, he put in nearly half of his wealth. He intended to get closer to Qin Yu. What better opportunity to get closer to him than now? Others might not be able to grasp this opportunity, but he was able to grasp it well, before the others could react. When Qin Yu was unknown and unknown, when no one appreciated him, he had already bet half of his family's wealth. It was already powerful enough. Even if he lost, it wouldn't be a pity. Moreover, he knew in his heart that the final result would be as he expected. At that time, not only would he not lose, but he would also make a fortune. Even if it was only doubled, it would be enough for him to benefit a lot. Originally, Shualon had never had any contact with this kind of gambling. But after seeing it, Akira Kaneko and Shu Sure explained it to her. She had a general understanding of this. More people chose to bet on Old Gua's victory. As for the current odds, there was already a slight difference. Without thinking, she bet all her wealth on Qin Yu's competition. As for a tie, there were some people who bet on a tie, but there were fewer of them. Shualon didn't have much in her possession, but for most people, it was still quite a lot. Even if Qin Yu only gave some occasionally as pocket money. For most people, this was still a huge fortune. At least what Akira Kaneko took out was not as much as what Shualon took out. It was inevitable that he felt a little ashamed. Before, when he saw that Shualon never had the intention to pay, he thought that Qin Yu had always been in charge. Now it seemed that it wasn't because Shualon was shy of money. It was purely because there was no need. There were a lot of whispers. Of course, the experts with sharp ears and eyes couldn't ignore it. Qin Yu took in everyone's discussions and expressions in his heart. Then he smiled and shouted, "Wait a minute. I should be able to join in this gambling, right?" There was no rule that said that the people on the field couldn't bet on themselves or their opponents to win. Everyone watched with their own eyes. Qin Yu was like a magic trick. Piles after piles of treasures and excellent resources appeared. These things had a high value after a rough calculation. What's more, some of the things were even more unheard of. Once Qin Yu attacked like that, it caused everyone to be certain of his identity and origin. If he wasn't someone from the other divine realm, how could he take out so many good things that they didn't recognize so easily? One had to know that it wasn't easy to take out these things, just based on this appreciation. Even if some of the things weren't very valuable, they could be sold for a good price. Even if it was just a collection, it would be good. What's more, these things all looked extraordinary. Chapter 10:27. Every single one of them had an extremely noble appearance, and only a small number of them were recognized by others. This also caused the sound of people sucking in cold breaths. Only the value of being recognized was the value of that. It had already made countless people click their tongues. They admitted that they definitely didn't have such a rich background, not to mention those that they couldn't recognize. All of them didn't look bad. Obviously, their value was also extremely high. All of these things are used to buy my victory. I don't know if these things can be converted into money. If not, I'm afraid I'll have to sell them on the spot. Although Qin Yu said those words, right after he finished saying those words, there were many people in the crowd who thought that they didn't lack money. They could be considered to have some eyesight. They all raised their hands one after another. They had long had their eyes on one or two of the treasures. These things were difficult to find elsewhere. Some of them had even been searching for a long time, but they couldn't find them anywhere. It was none other than because they were rare in the world. But now, Qin Yu casually took out piles of them. If he had these, then he would be able to gather enough materials. Most of the other people had similar thoughts. There were also some who purely saw the value of these things. They knew that these things would only sell for a higher price if they were placed elsewhere. Therefore, the price they shouted was also extremely high. In a short while, more and more people came for the winter vacation. And there were also many people who had their eyes on different things. This rough calculation added up to tens of millions. Such a huge sum of wealth was only exchanged for a small portion of the things. Moreover, this was the price they shouted on a whim. If these things were placed elsewhere, they could be sold for a higher price. The person in charge of the casino in the arena blushed. Looking at these things, he could naturally recognize them with his eyesight. Many of these things could be sold for a higher price outside. Their value couldn't even be measured with money. He hurriedly shouted for a stop. Of course, these things could be used as bets. In fact, they would make a lot of money if these things were used as bets. Sometimes, they would hold the common coins in their hands, but they might not be able to buy these extremely precious things. If that's the case, then help me estimate the value of these things. There are too many things. I can't even remember the names of these things. There are also some that were bestowed by the elders, and I don't dare to ask about their origins. So, it's enough to estimate its approximate value. Seeing those treasures piled up like a mountain, Qin Yu felt a lot of emotions in his heart. although he had a lot of good resources in his hands now. There were even some extremely precious materials that were extremely hard to come by. But after all, he didn't have much money on hand. This was especially true when he frequently entered and exited the God realm. Most of the time, before they could accumulate enough money, they would have already changed worlds. At that time, the currency in his hands would also become a pile of waste, although he could still use another day. But after all, every time he came to a new God realm, he had no way to take out any currency. As expected, I'm still too poor. Looks like I'll have to find a way to accumulate more currency in the future. Who knows when it will come in handy? Too poor. These things were already comparable to the wealth of many experts. There were also some rich people who thought that their net worth was more than 10 times that of people of the same level. These things were enough for them to be proud of and even have an extremely luxurious life. Not to mention that they didn't have to worry about food and drink. They also spent lavishly to nurture some juniors. They lived in the best places and used the best things. But now, looking at these truly good things, thinking back to the good things that they had in the past, they couldn't help but feel a little sore. Compared to these truly good things, what could their things even be considered as? The things that Chinyu casually took out didn't make Chinyu's heart ache, but many people couldn't take their eyes off them. These things were many times their net worth. Only then did Akira Kaneko and Baishur realize what kind of people they had unintentionally met. Even if it were them, they wouldn't be able to take out even 1/10 of these things. Even if they were considered to have some family or some power, they naturally didn't lack food and clothing on a daily basis, and even used the best of the best. But it was absolutely impossible for them to take out so many good things. Now, there were many things that were enough to make them drool with desire. Sky Cloud Bamboo. Heavens, it's actually Sky Cloud Bamboo. I've heard that this thing hasn't appeared for at least 10,000 years. Akira Kaneko held his breath. This was a top-grade material that he had dreamed of. How many years had it been that he hadn't found such a precious material? He had thought that perhaps he wouldn't be able to find it in this life. It was even possible that he wouldn't be able to find it in this lifetime. This material had been missing for a long time. If he had found it within 1,000 years, then so be it. If he had found it even later, it wouldn't have been of any use to him. But now, this was already the best he could hope for. There was a glimmer of hope at the end of the tunnel. He had actually encountered Sky Cloud Bamboo. This kind of thing hadn't appeared for many years. Even if it did appear, it was very likely that it wouldn't fall into his hands. After all, there were many people who were more powerful and wealthy than him. But because of his previous actions, he still had a bit of a friendship with Chinyu. Did this mean that he could also make an abacus? What if it fell into his hands? As for the price, he naturally wouldn't treat it badly. As long as he was given a chance, it would be fine. Under the circumstance that they had a friendship, his chances of getting the Sky Cloud Bamboo would be higher. Can you take this thing out and leave it for me? Of course, he wasn't so thick-skinned as to take it for free. Instead, he was prepared to pay a high enough price. Even if he didn't have that many resources, he couldn't afford such a huge price. But he was still thick-skinned. He wanted Chinyu to keep it for now. The importance of this item to him was simply too great. If he could get his hands on this material, he would have a powerful weapon in his hands. A powerful weapon was very important. However, anyone with a relatively high level of strength was very clear in their hearts. A powerful weapon could allow one to unleash extraordinary power. The saber that Chinyu used before was extremely domineering, and it suited him very well. If he didn't have a saber, Chinyu would still be extremely strong. At the very least, he wouldn't feel as if he was about to be suppressed by a single glance. There was a huge difference between having a weapon and not having one. Currently, the weapon he used most effectively was a long, thin saber. It was light and easy to use, and it could easily cut through skin and even slice through bones. To him, it was more convenient for him to use this thing. Chapter 10:28. Sky Cloud Bamboo. The onlookers wanted nothing more than a spit all over Akira Kaneko's face. How could such a precious existence be kept for him just because of a single sentence from him? Did he even know that sky cloud bamboo had suddenly appeared? What did it mean? It was just that they hadn't spread the news beforehand. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to pay such a high price. If it weren't for the fact that they didn't have enough money on them, they would have shouted the highest price possible. Sky cloud bamboo was priceless. Even if someone could pay a very high price, if someone went overboard and asked for an astronomical price, as long as sky cloud bamboo didn't exist, no one would be able to get that kind of money. No matter how heaven-defying the price was, it would be completely useless. If sky cloud bamboo wanted to grow, it would require extremely harsh conditions. The right time, the right place, and the right people. Not only did it require an absolutely pure and precious place to grow, it also required the right weather and the right people to intervene. It had to be given sufficient nourishment. If sky cloud bamboo wanted to grow, it would require many auxiliary plants. It was precisely because of these harsh conditions that even a seedling was hard to find in this world. Not to mention a fully grown sky cloud bamboo after countless years. Chinyu complied with Akira Kaneko's request and took out a small section of sky cloud bamboo. Let's forget about it this time. This sentence was within everyone's expectations. There wasn't much noise in the crowd anymore. However, many couldn't help but laugh. As expected, sky cloud bamboo was extremely valuable. They were wondering how someone could be so careless as to toss sky cloud bamboo to the side. It was like tossing a piece of trash. Their scalps went numb and their eyelids twitched. Although Akira Kaneko was somewhat disappointed, he didn't force it. Even though he really wanted it, since sky cloud bamboo had appeared, he had to fight for it. Even if he failed this time, it didn't matter. Chinyu had already proven to him that he didn't need Goldie to be his underling, nor did he lack people to curry favor with him. As long as he wanted to, he could easily become the most powerful person in the world. However, there was another sentence after this sentence. This section is too small. It's too unsightly. I have some undamaged adult plants here. I think the effect will be even better. What he had casually thrown into the pile of resources just now was just a small bamboo joint. Although it was still considered complete, it was already sufficient. But after all, it was only a small section. After saying this, Chinyu's hand glowed with a warm luster. Its entire body was like a layer of green jade. It was taller than a person, and it was extremely sturdy. One look, and one could tell that it was top-notch. There were some leaves growing on it, and the bamboo roots were wrapped in a thick layer of mud. This lump of mud didn't look very eye-catching. However, there were still people who recognized the extraordinary features of this lump of mud. If it wasn't for the effect of the mud, there was no way the sky cloud bamboo could have been preserved so well. A perfectly preserved sky cloud bamboo. He even buried it in the forest to create this extraordinary pile of mud. In fact, it could even ensure that the sky cloud bamboo could survive and continue growing. The value of a sky cloud bamboo that could continue to grow far exceeded the value of a small piece of sky cloud bamboo. If it survived, it meant that it could be reborn. Even if a part of the bamboo joint was cut off, it could still grow back. As long as one invested enough, they could even have an inexhaustible supply of precious sky cloud bamboo. Akira Kaneko already had a guess, but he didn't dare to believe it. If this treasure was really for him, then he would have profited greatly. However, before things were set in stone, Akira Kaneko didn't think that he would have such heaven-defying luck. After all, he had never shown any extraordinary luck before. What are you waiting for? I don't want it. This thing wasn't that important to men. Although sky cloud bamboo seemed to be extremely precious here, there were quite a few in the wood realm. Although they were rare, it wasn't as if they hadn't appeared in many years. Thus, he had a large patch of sky cloud bamboo in his collection. This stock was already in excellent condition. Although it wasn't the Bamboo King, its value wasn't something that small piece could compare to. Compared to many natural treasures, it could already be considered a small piece of top-notch treasure. It wasn't that Akira Kaneko didn't want it, but he didn't think that it would actually fall into his hands. With his intelligence, it wasn't that he didn't understand what Chinyu meant. He just didn't dare to believe that he would one day be able to obtain such a precious treasure. He had clearly felt that it was out of his reach before, but now it was right in his hands. Sucking in a cold breath, Akira Kaneko made up his mind. From now on, he would follow Chinyu and sign a contract to sell himself to him. However, he had already decided on this friend. If someone were to go against Chinyu, then they would be going against him. I'll thicken my skin and accept it. I don't have enough money on me, but I'll definitely make up for it later. To be able to obtain such a complete and living sky cloud bamboo, he had already profited greatly from the start. Even if he had to spend a lot of money, he had still profited greatly. Everyone else could only feel envy towards him. There were even some people who wanted to forcefully snatch it from him. However, they were wary of Chinyu, who was standing next to him, and didn't dare to act rashly. It wasn't as if Akira Kaneko couldn't see through their actions. Naturally, he would scoff at their actions. However, this thing had already been promised to him, so he couldn't just hand it over. Since this thing belonged to him, anyone who coveted it was his enemy. Of all the people present, there were very few who could be considered enemies by him. Most of them didn't have the ability to threaten him. Please take your revenge another day. That old man Gua has been waiting impatiently for a long time now. I believe that you can definitely beat him to a pulp. However, it's still better to hold back a little. If you kill him in one go, who knows if the Gua family will turn around and accuse you. After everyone else heard this, they finally refocused their attention on this matter. This matter could be considered both a big and small matter. However, because everyone had focused their attention on the pile of protection before, they had all neglected the real reason why they were here. This was because Chinyu had taken the initiative to compete with Old Man Gua. The latter was somewhat famous, and many people knew him, although he wasn't considered one of the top few people. However, they had all heard of him. Chinyu, on the other hand, was somewhat unknown. However, being unknown didn't mean that he was weak. A small number of people who truly knew about him were waiting to see him make a fool of himself. It wasn't certain who would win or lose. Chapter 1029. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation, it's my turn. Finally, they were back to the main topic. After the huge pile of heaven and earth treasures appeared, many people started to have more confidence in Chinyu. To be able to take out such a huge fortune so casually. Could it be that he was a powerful force that they had never heard of? If that was the case, Old One might have really hit a wall. But most people were gloating, and very few were willing to stand up for him. You have a lot of good treasures in your hands. However, experts never care about so-called treasures. These external objects are just external objects after all. Old Gua's face didn't look too good. When he saw the pile of treasures, how could he not feel fear? If Chinyu was really that great power that had hidden itself from the world, this time he had really kicked an iron plate. But now, he didn't even care about life and death. Even if he lost this time, he couldn't care about anything else. If he denied and admitted defeat in front of everyone, wouldn't he lose face? Regardless of whether it was for his own pride or for the sake of taking revenge. He couldn't admit defeat in front of everyone. That would be an insult to him. Back on the field, because the two of them agreed to fight, there wasn't the barrier that Chinyu saw at the beginning. That barrier was mainly to prevent all kinds of ferocious beasts from escaping and hurting everyone present. But the two of them agreed to fight, and there was almost no possibility of them hurting anyone else. The two of them didn't seem to be irrational. Besides, the field was very spacious. Although there was no barrier, there were other ways to prevent the leakage of power. So, the barrier didn't seem to be necessary, and there was no need to set it up. Chinyu naturally wanted to go in and out. Back on the field, he stood in front of Old Gua. The pile of treasures was still being counted. Many of them hadn't been seen in a long time. From time to time, there would be exclamations, which made Old Gua's face turn ugly. When he was facing danger and even felt that it was troublesome, someone actually stole his limelight. Speaking of which, it wasn't a person, but a pile of treasures. No matter how petty he was, could it be that he would haggle over every ounce with a pile of treasures? When he heard these cries of surprise, no matter how vexed he was, he would never say a word. Even if he was in a bad mood, he had made up his mind. This time, it must not be leaked. Once the victor was decided, he would settle the score. Fleeting Sparrow hand. Jade Peach faced Drunken Spear. Old Gua didn't hold back at all. He used all of his trump cards in one go. Since they had already agreed to fight regardless of life or death, they couldn't care less about Qin Yu's background. This time, he had made up his mind to determine a victor. Moreover, he wanted Qin Yu to die in this arena. Otherwise, why would he care? How could he bear to do it? How could he face his dead youngest son? The others couldn't help but close their eyes. He didn't want to see such a cruel scene. However, when he opened his eyes, he saw that Qin Yu was still standing unscathed. It didn't even seem to move half a step. Everyone was a little surprised. Old Man Gua's famous unique skill was quite powerful. At least, there were very few people here who could take it. Even Old Gua himself didn't think that his technique would miss. To him, his famous technique was extremely powerful. A normal young person wouldn't be able to take even one of his attacks. However, Qin Yu was unscathed after taking 2 of his attacks. He couldn't help but feel surprised. That's impossible. How powerful am I? My famous technique is undefeatable. You must have something on you. You must have cheated. Of course, Old Gua didn't want to believe that he was so useless. However, everyone had seen it with their own eyes. In their eyes, he'd indeed lost. He had even used his famous technique, yet he still didn't win. If he wasn't defeated, then what was? But he didn't want to admit it. He had taken out his trump card the moment he went up, and it wasn't to become a joke to everyone. He wanted to finish off this opponent in the shortest amount of time possible. He wanted to avenge his youngest son. But now, he didn't get his revenge. Instead, he became a joke. He didn't even dare to imagine what he would do if he lost. At that time, wouldn't everyone laugh at him for being as blind as a bat? He wanted to challenge a rising star with a bright future. From the beginning to the end, Qin Yu didn't say a word. He didn't show any expression, because he didn't care. However, Old Gua had almost driven himself crazy with his speculations. The others didn't say anything, but they couldn't help but whisper among themselves. After all, a battle like this was supposed to be a fight. One was a young junior, and the other was a capable senior. The two had just started, but the winner had already been decided. Those who used to be friends with Old Gua couldn't help but shake their heads and sigh. He's really old and confused. Look at his youngest son. I can tell he won't become anything. Since you can't become a talent, why go against such a young man with a bright future? Isn't that a loss? If he gets revenge later, he'll cry foul. Many people felt that it wasn't worth it, just for a useless brat. There was really no need to fight against a young man like Qin Yu, who had a bright future and was destined to reach the top. I'll fight you to the death. You let me fight, but you didn't. Are you looking down on me? Old Gua was full of resentment and had nowhere to vent. In the end, he could only target Qin Yu. Only then could he feel a little better. But the final result was already decided. Qin Yu won almost without any suspense. Old Gua's famous skills were useless against him. What effect could the other skills have? Even if he used his famous skills a few more times. Old Gua was so tired that he was panting. He could also take the next attack without changing his expression. I've let you fight many times. This time it's my turn. Few people knew what Qin Yu's words meant. Akira Kaneko, on the other hand, was worried. Perhaps he knew it best among all of them. Qin Yu hadn't been serious from the beginning to the end. It was only now that he became a little more serious. No, there was another person who knew it better than him. Xuelon ought to be the one who understood Qin Yu the best. While everyone's emotions were fluctuating because of every change, she was calm from the beginning to the end, as if she already knew. Chapter 10:30. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. It was that heavy and domineering saber again. Many people had no impression of this saber, but it didn't stop their curiosity. Where did such a domineering and fierce saber come from? Just by looking at it with the naked eye, they were shocked, let alone under the saber. Old Gua was the one who faced this fierce force the most. Cold sweat broke out on his head unknowingly. Everyone thought that perhaps he could handle it with ease. From the beginning to the end, he didn't show any panic. But now, only he knew how scared he was. Was he going to become a corpse like Guoyang? She ended up in such a miserable state. He ended his life miserably and miserably. Perhaps his decision was wrong from the very beginning. He shouldn't have come to Qinyu. So much so that he might end up in a miserable state. At the moment when he was about to die, he suddenly regretted. Have mercy. I beg you to spare my life. I promise I won't find trouble with you in the future. All the previous grudges will be written off. I failed to recognize Mount Tai. Please spare me this time. Unfortunately, it was too late. The last moment of repentance had no effect. Everyone sighed and was shocked. However, most of them took it for granted. Although old Gua had died in the end, he had deserved it. He deserved it. Because he was the one who proposed to die. He was the one who proposed it. No one could say anything if he died. They couldn't even use their own strength to suppress him and help him out. Because Qinyu's strength was enough to make them afraid. Such powerful strength in such a young age. In addition, he had a batch of treasures in his hands. It was no exaggeration to say that as long as Qinyu was willing, he could go to any major force. These treasures were enough to make everyone's heart move. No one could resist the temptation of this batch of things. Who would be able to reject such a huge amount of resources? Now, no one could tell if Qinyu had more precious things in his hands. At least from his attitude, they knew. He seemed to be able to casually take out all the items that he had taken out as a bet. Moreover, he was the type who wouldn't feel pity even if he lost. Although this was somewhat absurd, there were a few big shots with discerning eyes. He could still tell whether a person cares about something. Obviously, Qinyu didn't care about the things he had taken out. He actually won. Oh my God, didn't we strike it rich? You can't change in the middle of the competition. In other words, with the odds of 1, 2, the items in Big Brother Qin's hands have doubled by a fifth. I sure couldn't believe it. She had never even seen such a large sum of money. When they saw it, they were filled with shock. However, there was no greed in his heart. As the father of Dark Eclipse, Qing Hai's heart almost jumped out of his chest when he saw this scene from afar. The casino was built by the gladiator arena. In other words, if someone makes a killing, that would require his approval as the steward to transfer such a large sum of money. However, this money originally belonged to the gladiator arena. If it were to escape from his hands, even if this matter didn't have much to do with him, he still had to be taught a lesson. Moreover, it wasn't like he didn't have any grudges with Qinyu. Although very few people knew about the matter of him blocking Qinyu earlier, however, it wasn't that no one knew. If this was discovered, some of the responsibility would be thrown on his head. He wouldn't be able to stay in his position as the steward. Many people had already set their sights on his current position. If there was even the slightest bit of carelessness, he might be forcefully pulled down from his position as the first steward. Originally, he was about to be pulled into the main family, to become one of them, to take a share of the profits. But now, things had really come to fruition. Not to mention a share, he couldn't even keep his own position. Not to mention how nervous he was. Even with his current strength, he no longer relied on these illusory things. Instead, he believed in his own strength and connections. However, he couldn't help but pray silently, hoping that the worst-case scenario wouldn't happen. However, what he was afraid of came true. Originally, he was prepared to evade it so easily. Anyway, as long as he wasn't there, this matter might be able to drag on for a while. It was a pity that his precious daughter had directly led him here. Shusher searched for a long time before he found Qinghai's location. Since they were of the same origin, Shusher also knew what Qinghai was thinking. However, such a large sum of wealth had already attracted many people's attention. If he delayed it again and again, he would only lose face. If he did it more straightforwardly, he might even be able to save some face. After all, running away again and again wasn't something a smart person should do. You are really my good daughter. She had caused him to suffer unspeakably. However, in front of the daughter he had always doted on, he couldn't say a single harsh word. Qinyu, on the other hand, wasn't surprised at all. Xiulan wasn't surprised by anything. If she knew, she knew. Among everyone, the one with the biggest reaction was Akira Kaneko. He didn't expect Shu Shi to have such an identity. Although it wouldn't have been a big deal if he had known in advance, he was still a little surprised when he found out this time. Because he hadn't thought of it before, he couldn't help but size him up again. Shu Shi indeed looked tall and valiant. Qinghai had always been famous for being imposing. His appearance when he was young was also somewhat similar to the current Shu Shi. It was just that for some reason, he had never thought about it in this direction before. Shu Shi was more or less shy. He changed the topic and took the initiative to ask about the money. When he heard the question about a huge sum of wealth, Qinghai's teeth began to itch. He also wanted this thing. He didn't want to destroy the 10,000 years of foundation of the arena. However, if this money flowed out of his pocket, he wouldn't have the glory he had today. However, although Shu Shi was his daughter, she didn't side with him at all. Instead, she sided with Qinyu. However, this problem had to be solved sooner or later. Just as Shu Shi said, if this matter continued to drag on, it would only cause damage to their reputation. After thinking about it, Qinghai had no choice in the end. If you're worried about that money, you can rest assured. I just casually took it out to place a bet. It doesn't matter if you give me the extra money or not. At this critical moment, he heard these words that were like the sound of nature. No matter how steady Qinghai was, he couldn't help but feel happy about the upgrade. This way, he could have the best of both worlds and didn't have to worry anymore. Chapter 1031. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. There was no such thing as a free lunch in this world. Qinghai was still too naive. Not to mention the others. Mingshi couldn't bear to see Qinghai shirk his responsibilities. Qinyu said that he wouldn't accept these, but could they really not give him anything? This was a little too unreasonable. Anyone who knew about this would immediately feel that they were in the wrong. If this was a small amount, it would indeed be insignificant to many people. However, this was a gargantuan fortune. Qinyu didn't care, whether it was to avoid a bad reputation or not, or to consolidate his reputation and not let others know about his bad reputation. They had to resolve this matter, instead of being so vague like this, as if this had never happened. To think that it would happen in front of so many people. There were also many people who had noticed it. Then this matter had to be resolved. It wasn't good for everyone to be so vague, and they would suffer more losses. Then how about this? I'll give you a title. This is already the best solution. I really don't have the ability to take out such a large sum of money. Even now, he still does not understand where Qinyu managed to gather such a large number of treasures, especially his age. His fortune was already so huge that he couldn't easily take it out. Although it couldn't be compared to the collections of some large factions, some small factions weren't as rich as him. It was conceivable that Qinyu would be considered a small number of people in the future. But this was something that Qinghai couldn't accept, because after this, he would be targeted by many people. I don't care about those empty titles. Even if you want to give it to me, even if you have to use empty titles to replace the huge purple gold realm that I can get, at least let me see the substantial benefits. Although Qinyu didn't care, Qinghai was the one who brought this up, so he had to see some profits. Otherwise, it wouldn't be so easy to just give him an empty title. At least give him a position with real power. Of course, this was just a show of sincerity. It didn't mean that he really needed those positions. Because of this, Qinghai couldn't make up his mind. The titles that he could give so far were just empty titles. What real value do they have? But if he wanted to use these titles to casually send people back, it was somewhat impossible. Just by looking at how many good things Qinyu had in his hands, he knew that he wasn't someone easy to send away. At least what he saw and heard was not inferior to that of an heir from a large faction. Moreover, his age and strength were slightly higher. No matter how thick-skinned he was, he couldn't just send people away with an empty title. Moreover, Mingshi was watching. If he really dared to send him away without doing anything, he would definitely be stabbed in the back by his daughter, who he had raised like a treasure since she was a child. Although it was understandable, Qinghai still felt, what do you think the position as the position? They have a certain amount of real power. Although their status is not the highest, they still hold a certain amount of power. Translation, translation, you can glares translation, that translation. This is the best I can do. If Qin Yu wasn't satisfied, he would have to ask for instructions from someone higher up. But if he did that, he would inevitably be reprimanded. Although his position as the steward seemed very high. Previously, he had also swaggered and said that he was half the head of the family. This was true, but this half-head of the family wasn't the only one. He could be kicked out at any time. He didn't have much confidence that he would have his current position and never decline. Everyone knew that the position of the steward was glorious. But in detail, it depended on whether the real head of the family was satisfied or not. Just like the position of the steward, it had some weight in the eyes of others. But he could also arrange it. This position is considered not bad. I can guarantee that this is the best my father can do. But he can also make some requests. After all, it's such a large sum of money. Boucher had indeed spared no effort in thinking for Qin Yu. He also cherished this friend very much. Qin Hai was so angry that his nose was crooked. In the end, he could only roll his eyes and do nothing. Who asked Qin Yu to have a hold on his weakness now? Whether it was success or failure, it was just a word from Qin Yu. No need, just do your best. Although Qin Hai had some grudges with him before. But those small matters were decided on the spot. Since it was already in the past, he wouldn't bother about it. It was already good enough. He just casually put up that money. He didn't expect to get anything. Since all this was for nothing, whether he did his best or not was the most important thing. And not how much he really got. After all, he didn't lack these things. After being suppressed one after another, Qin Hai had unknowingly lowered his status. Especially in front of Qin Yu, he couldn't raise his head. In a short period of time, this matter was resolved. Akira Kaneko was a little surprised by Qin Yu's open-mindedness, but then he became calm. If he had such a huge fortune, he wouldn't care about these small profits. That's right, they were small profits. For Qin Yu, if he did the same thing a dozen times, he would get the same result. Therefore, it seemed reasonable that he didn't care about these things. Just like the beggars on the side of the road, they would never understand why those real big shots would go to famous vegetarian restaurants. They always felt that it was best to be able to eat a bowl of rice with some fish and meat. But they didn't know that for the real big shots, they had long looked down on these ordinary things. They were already pursuing a higher realm. I don't know when I will be able to reach your level. Qin Yu pondered for a moment and understood what he was talking about. It should be this calm attitude. But he was used to it. These things were useless to him. However, after experiencing many things, he understood some things that were taken for granted in his eyes. In the eyes of others, it was extremely inconceivable. If one day you are as powerful as I am, and have a rich family background, then perhaps you and I will be in the same realm. Akira Kaneko suddenly thought of the sky cloud bamboo that had been casually thrown to him. That was a treasure of great value to him. But to Qin Yu, it was something that could be casually given away. If he were to casually give away the sky cloud bamboo, without any hesitation, for example, then he would have no hope in life. Chapter 1032. Jin Family's Garrison. Dazzling Dragon Pool. Suddenly, a pillar of light shot up into the sky. It shattered into pieces in the blink of an eye. It formed a huge ring. It rushed in all directions. Wherever it passed, there was no grass. All the trees were bare. Only the trunks and leaves were all blown away by this powerful wave of air. No one knew where they floated to. Most of them were smashed into powder in that instant and scattered in the air. Such a huge fluctuation affected everything within a radius of 10,000 miles. Some of the spirit fields that were exposed to the air suffered heavy losses. Countless spirit leaves were smashed into powder and disappeared. There was also a small portion that disappeared without a trace. Among them, the roots were used as medicine and the flowers were used as medicine. Those who used leaves as medicine were the most miserable. They had completely lost their value. Especially some 1,000-year-old and 10,000-year-old spirit herbs. They were persecuted for no reason. but the distance was so far, most people did not know where to find the culprit. Originally, the commotion here would not affect the Qinyuan arena that was set up at the edge of the Gold Realm. But when something happened to the garrison, all the direct descendants of the Jin family would clearly sense everything. Even some remote branches would receive an emergency call and quickly rush back. Oh no, something happened in the family. I have to go back quickly. Akira Kaneko could only hurriedly say hello. He did not even have time to pack his things. For the current him, packing things had become secondary. If there was really something urgent, because he was packing things for a while, he would be delayed. He would definitely regret it. Seeing that his expression did not seem to be fake, it seemed that something extremely urgent had really happened. Mingshi hurriedly offered to go and help. It was precisely because of the word help that Akira Kaneko reminded him. Although his strength was not bad, he was not considered the top in the family, since something so sudden had happened in the family. In that case, it would be a good choice to hire someone more powerful and trustworthy to help him. People like Qing Hai would not do. He had too many tricks up his sleeve, and he also had a burden on him. Who knew which side he was on? But someone like Qin Yu, who had a clean background and powerful strength, was trustworthy. He was the most suitable candidate. There was no one else around who was more suitable than Qin Yu. I wonder if you can come with me. It would be best if nothing happened. If there's really a problem, I hope you can lend a hand. Although I don't have enough wealth, my family has a lot of collections. Qin Yu couldn't help but feel a little familiar. It seemed that there had been mermaids before who said how much they had in their family's collection and that they would fulfill their promise after the matter was settled. As a result, the resources in his hands were innumerable and piled up like a mountain. There were many things that even he couldn't remember clearly because there were too many of them. Unless it was something extremely valuable, he wouldn't even bother to remember it. You don't have to pay me. I don't need your money. I have my own things to do. We'll meet again if fate wills it. Akira Kaneko was somewhat disappointed. With Qin Yu's strength, if he could have Qin Yu by his side to help him, Qin Yu would definitely be able to defeat him. He was sure that his journey would be extremely smooth. Now that things were extremely critical, he was also in a hurry to get on his way. He didn't have time to dwell on these details. He could only sigh that they were really not fated to meet. Perhaps fate would allow them to meet again in the future. No one knew that the next meeting would be so soon. Qin Yu had sensed the tracks of Shenron. Although they were far away from him, Shenron could sense each other. So the moment there was a change, he had to know the news on his side. And he had a general direction. There were already many guests in front of the Jin family. Any outsider who came would be rejected. But countless experts whose protection had been damaged were guarding outside the door, and they were unwilling to leave easily. So many treasures had been damaged. If they gave up easily, who would compensate them for their losses? The Jin family was also considered to have an extremely deep foundation. It wasn't that they couldn't afford to compensate them. Thinking of this, they were even more unwilling to leave. They had to calculate all their losses one by one. Qin Yu came here and saw such a scene. Many people were either standing, sitting cross-legged, or directly walking in the air. They were scattered in front of the towering door. But no one was willing to leave. They were all guarding in front of the vermilion door, as if waiting for something. But a moment later, a child opened the door and walked out helplessly. He was so anxious that his forehead was covered in sweat. Everyone, please leave for now. When our ancestors have dealt with the trivial matters, they will definitely go door to apologize. When the time comes, we will definitely prepare a generous gift. After saying that, he didn't leave. These experts weren't easy to fool. Who would believe a verbal promise? If they didn't take out the benefits that fell into their hands, they would definitely not let it go. Qin Yu noticed that they were more or less holding some empty spiritual items in their hands. The child was so anxious that his forehead was covered in sweat. He made many promises and kept cursing and betting. In the end, he used the Jin family's reputation as a guarantee and reluctantly sent everyone back. But they agreed that if there was no news in 7 days, they would visit again. Everyone left as soon as they said they would. Those who had the ability to know of the Jin family's existence and guarded the door were all experts. Naturally, they came and went without a trace. The child thought that the matter was over, but when he turned around, he found that there was still one person who hadn't left. Then, he repeated what he had just said. He spoke until his mouth was dry. He couldn't wait to run back and drink 2 pots of herbal tea to quench his thirst. In the end, seeing that Chinyu was still indifferent, he didn't know what to do. "What are you doing here? If you have any requests, just say it. The ancestors can't spare the time now." The child guarding the door had no choice in the end, because the child guarding the door had been out for a long time and hadn't returned. Akira Kaneko stepped out of the door, wanting to see what had happened. Who knew that he would see someone as soon as he went out, which surprised and delighted him. He hurriedly asked the child to prepare the things. He wanted to entertain an important guest. Chung Tong was slightly surprised. So many powerful experts have been sent back. But this last person actually knew the young master. He even treated him as an important guest. One had to know that there were very few people who could be treated as important guests by the Jin family. Strength, reputation, character, and friendship were all indispensable. But he didn't dare to refute. He hurriedly glanced at Chinyu and quickly went to prepare. Chapter 1033. It's really fate. I thought I would at least have to wait until I've dealt with the matters in the family before I could meet you again. I didn't expect your destination to be my family. High-grade green tea. After 81 processes, only a small part of it could be formed in the end. It would only be taken out to entertain distinguished guests. Usually, even the ancestral elders couldn't bear to take it out to eat. It was only soaked in ordinary water. There was a faint fragrance in the air. After taking a sip, one's whole body felt comfortable and clear. You're really generous. This spiritual tea could be considered a small top-grade item. Its quality was indeed top-grade. In order to entertain him, Akira Kaneko had indeed asked people to take out the best things. High-grade comprehension should be matched with someone who is worthy of it. But for you, I feel that this spirit tea is not worthy of you. The tea was top-grade tea. It couldn't even be found anywhere else. But after all, this tea was used to entertain distinguished guests. Although it was rare, it wasn't so rare that he couldn't take it out at all. It was just that it was extremely precious. He had made such a huge bargain. He hadn't repaid it yet. So although the tea was good tea, but he couldn't wait for it to be better. Speaking of which, why did you suddenly come to my Jin family? Calculating the time, since he arrived at this time, he should have set off with him. In fact, he had just arrived not long ago. He changed his clothes and didn't have time to figure out the whole story. Because he was cautious, he went out to take a look and found Chinyu. He suddenly thought of old Gua's fate. He faintly felt a little lucky. If he hadn't found Chinyu at that time and allowed Chinyu to stand outside, who knew what would have happened? Chinyu's strength made him feel unfathomable. For the entire Jin family, which was facing danger, he didn't know his origin and purpose. If he hadn't known Chinyu before, this matter wouldn't have been so easy to let go. And now the Jin family, which was on the verge of crisis, might not be able to withstand Chinyu's anger. He couldn't afford any accidents. He had come here because of what had happened to the Jin family. It was more or less related to him. Because of him, Kyuki Shunran could cause chaos in the entire God realm. The situation here wasn't much different. Although they didn't reject him like that, they couldn't wait to kill him immediately. That way, he would be able to avoid all possible dangers. However, they did not welcome his arrival. It was obvious that Shunran had its own pride and arrogance. After he had stayed for a day, the divine dragons in the God realm finally discovered his tracks. After that, there was such a huge commotion. Speaking of which, I don't know why there was such a huge commotion. I've always known that our family isn't an ordinary family, but this time, it's a little strange. I don't know if it's just my imagination, but I feel like there's a big secret hidden here. Akira Kaneko normally wouldn't talk so much with people outside his family. However, Chinyu was a different existence. Unknowingly, he revealed many of his guesses, even though he didn't know much about it. What he revealed was that the Jin family was almost unable to bear it. However, At least on the surface, the current Jean family wasn't at the end of their rope yet. To be able to take out so many good things to entertain distinguished guests. One could imagine that the family's foundation was still there. The foundation of these families hadn't been completely used up. It was enough for them to slowly persevere, no matter what happened. If it was just the losses of others, they would need to compensate. There was no need to be so conflicted, as if the sky would collapse in the next moment. Don't you know what happened? Don't worry, your family only encountered some small danger this time. It won't really affect you, unless he's crazy. Akira Kaneko suddenly understood that Shinyu must know something. Otherwise, there was no way to explain why he came. If it was related to what had happened to the Jean family recently, then Shinyu at least had his own channels of information. In other words, the information they knew must be different. Akira Kaneko wasn't stupid enough to be tricked. He wouldn't really expose the whole family's background in one breath. But he still wanted to know something from Shinyu, even if it could make him feel at ease. This meant that he also had to give some information, at least as an exchange. What made him care about was the him that Shinyu mentioned. Who is him? Shinyu didn't answer his question. Since no one told you, then this is what you can't know. Don't worry, this is just a movement made by a powerhouse out of boredom. It won't really affect you, but his target is me. Akira Kaneko still didn't understand the meaning of this. He didn't understand what Shinyu had to do with this matter. The butler, who had the highest status in the Jean family besides the ancestral elders, walked out. The ancestral elders more or less had their own thoughts. However, they trusted this butler more than anyone else. No one knew why, but they were all habitually obedient. Because of this, the butler had a very high status. There was no so-called patriarch in the Jean family. It was all managed by the ancestral elders. The butler was usually in charge of some trivial matters, but since it was to entertain distinguished guests, ancestral elders would often appear. The reason why only the butler came out this time was that the ancestral elders all had their own things to do. None of them were free to do anything. In fact, everyone was very curious about Shinyu, who was born in Laker. Akira Kaneko was the future candidate for an ancestral elder. Naturally, he had the ability to judge who was a distinguished guest. He had never made a mistake, but after all, Shinyu's age was enough to make them curious. In today's world, those who were strong were all over the age of 1,000 or 10,000 years old. The sudden appearance of a young and extremely powerful person was indeed easy to attract attention. Is this your friend? Akira Kaneko looked at the butler and said without hesitation, "We met by chance some time ago. Because of Brother Chin's strength, I took the initiative to make friends with him and became good friends." The implication was that he took the initiative to get close to him, and his importance was self-evident. If he was just an ordinary friend, of course, he didn't need to say so. After all, the rules of the Jean family were still very strict. There would be no prejudice because of identity or family background. However, after he said those words, Chinyu's status in his heart was clearly expressed. He thought that he was not as good as Chinyu, and his words were quite respectful. To show his attitude, he put himself under Chinyu. Chapter 1034. The butler's expression became slightly more serious. His attitude towards Chin Yu had also become much more respectful. The word respectful was not only about one's attitude, but also one's mentality. Sometimes the attitude was very good, but it might not be true respect from the heart. It might just be politeness. This is the butler. If there's anything, you can go to him directly. The elders won't be able to leave for a while. Perhaps you know more than me and should be able to guess. Now, the butler handles all the big and small matters in the family. Even if it's some confidential matters, the butler can handle it. You might as well go to him directly. After the butler heard this, the shock in his heart did not surface on the surface. Akira Kaneko brought up the matter at this time. It was very likely to be that matter. But that matter was confidential. How can an outsider know about it? The Jean family had a small amount of power, but they had never shown their faces in the outside world. When the gladiator arena was in full swing, he didn't get involved either. Even Akira Kaneko the future successor of the elders, had to fight. All of them had to go out and fight for their lives instead of working for themselves. There were many things involved in this. The most important thing was that the elders were all busy. It was not because the elders were all busy. They had a very high status long ago. Although there were many private provisions in his heart, the butler's face was still calm. But his tightly clenched hands showed how restless his mind was. Chinyu thought of some of his family's matters and turned his head to the side indifferently. He came here for only one purpose. The other things were other people's matters. He had no interest in other people's matters. The butler's expression, as if he was facing a great enemy, made him feel a little disdainful. It was just that he did not know if the more powerful elders would have such insight. They would be able to see his true intentions. It seemed that a butler knew very little after all. Although Akira Kaneko thought that the butler knew big and small secrets, Chinyu knew very well. These so-called secrets were only secrets that could be known by others, not the true secrets of 10,000 years. Akira Kaneko did not see the turbulence within. However, he could tell that something wasn't quite right. The atmosphere was too stiff. He wasn't very good at this kind of deceitful fighting, and he wasn't good at guessing people's thoughts. After all, the metal realm had always been straightforward. After the butler led the way, Akira Kaneko couldn't help but ask Chinyu what had happened. It's very simple. It's best if you don't know. Akira Kaneko was stumped by her words. There are some things that he shouldn't know. However, this matter should be excluded from the list. After all, he was the future heir. He would have to know sooner or later. The several ancestral elders each took a side. Everyone was firmly occupying their own positions, not moving an inch. However, that didn't stop them from opening their eyes and looking around. It didn't stop them from chatting. From the palm of his hand, a faint golden light hit the center of the pool. It gathered into an extremely powerful energy. It tightly suppressed the thing in the embryonic form. We can't go on like this. Third brother, aren't you the best at deduction? Why don't you deduce how to solve it this time? Third brother looked at the embryonic form that was continuously extracting the power from his body. He couldn't help but let out a bitter laugh. If only it was that simple. However, the problem now was that he couldn't spare any hands. How could he deduce? In addition, his ability was greatly limited. After the deduction, he would more or less suffer damage. When that happened, the pressure on the others would be even greater. He really couldn't bear it. However, at such a critical juncture, the result of the deduction was the most important. Let's work together. At most, we'll use more strength. Otherwise, all of us will have to suffer in the end. Yes, since we'll suffer great damage if we die early or late, we can still know the result of the deduction earlier. Although the 6 of them didn't grow up together, they had worked together for many years. Some of them had a master and disciple status. Some were even grandfather and grandson. Only with enough strength and the ability to go through many tests could they finally sit in this position. The relationship between them was naturally very deep. The ties between them couldn't be described with words. Third brother finally gritted his teeth and suddenly withdrew his hand. He held his breath and slowly exhaled. His eyelids kept twitching, but he didn't open his eyes. White mist rose from his body. Suddenly, he spat out a mouthful of blood. Lines of profound runes had already appeared in his palm. This deduction was unprecedentedly successful. It even made third brother feel that it was inconceivable. In the past, there had never been a time when it went as smoothly as this one, and it had never been as thrilling. Originally, he thought that after spitting out a mouthful of blood, the matter was basically over. However, the result of the deduction still appeared, and it was extremely clear. If it weren't for the fact that the place was wrong, he could still slowly absorb this experience. Perhaps it would be of great help to future deductions. The others immediately asked, anxiously, did he manage to deduce their chances of survival? Seeing the final result, third brother smiled bitterly. According to the result of the deduction, the last chance of survival is standing outside the door. But it's not a member of our gene family. Everyone looked outside the door in silence. This was a forbidden area in the family. Ordinary people couldn't easily enter. However, since third brother said that there was someone standing outside, there must be someone. Normally, it should be the housekeeper. However, it obviously wasn't the housekeeper this time. Otherwise, the deduction wouldn't have been told to third brother like that. The housekeeper didn't dare to listen anymore after hearing part of it. Knowing too much wouldn't do him any good. The reason why he could be trusted and sit in the housekeeper's position safely was because of this. He relied on his eyesight. If he didn't have this eyesight, he would have lost this position a long time ago because of various things. He would have been framed to death. If the young man beside him was really of great help to this matter, it would have a great impact. It could even cause a great impact, and perhaps things would take a turn for the better. In the end, this matter had a great impact on him. Success or failure depended on how long he could hold on. Jin Xiao could also be considered to have benefited from Qin Yu's fame and was also called over. If it were someone else, it would be impossible. Chapter 1035. It was a matter of life and death. Everyone would be cautious. The powerful force, without the slightest bit of malice, was probing. But as soon as it came to Qin Yu's side, it was directly rebounded. Although it wasn't much of a shock, that was also because Qin Yu didn't have any malice. This time, however, it was a draw. The elders weren't angry, but happy. Having such power might really be a turning point for this matter. As for Akira Kaneko, they temporarily put it to the back of their minds. One question after another was thrown out. They didn't care about their dignity as powerhouses at all. It could almost be said that they didn't care about their image. In the face of danger, all dignity was just a pile of trash. The third brother hid the deepest of all of them. After all, the result of his deduction was half and half. If it was great luck, it would be good. If it was great misfortune, it could even completely destroy the Jin family. But the result of the deduction was even clear. If they chose to eliminate this sudden opportunity by themselves, they would definitely return with a crushing defeat. At that time, the result wouldn't be good. So in the end, he could only take a gamble. After all, there was still a 50-50 chance of success. If he didn't even dare to take a gamble, there would be no chance at all. In comparison, it was better to take a gamble. He didn't even dare to tell the others about his speculation. If he dared to say it, the eldest brother would definitely choose to eliminate the danger. But who knew if there would be other results when the time came? But inadvertently, he made the right decision. The reason why the final result was half and half was that it depended on their own attitudes. These problems can all be put aside. I only came here for one purpose. Hand over the Shinran bloodline behind you. There were some special circumstances here. Qianjin Shinran didn't come out often, so countless years had polished it into a young dragon prototype. Naturally, it was born with a body that had great power since it was young. But after all, it had been sleeping for too long and was only a prototype, so there was no way to exert its full power. The place where it slept was under the land where the Jin family was now established. When the Jin family first developed, he must have relied on the accompanying items that the divine dragon had with him. However, as he grew stronger and stronger, he discovered the secret of Shinran. But according to Qin Yu's guess, they should not know that this was the famous Shinran. What's more, they didn't know that this was the original Shinran that had only appeared in ancient legends. It was because of this ignorance. In addition, they were a little greedy and wanted to develop for a longer period of time. Therefore, he used a special method to gather the power of all the powerhouses to suppress and seal the fledgling dragon. He enjoyed the benefits brought by Shinran, but he was greedy and inexperienced. He did not recognize the shocking origin of Shinran. Thus, he resorted to such a vile method. However, if one were to look at it from another perspective, they were only here to obtain treasures and obtain long-term development. She wasn't doing it for herself either. There was nothing wrong with this thinking. But the bad thing was that they thought it was a treasure of heaven and earth without a will. He didn't realize that this was an old monster that had been alive all this time. The reason why there was such a commotion was because of this, and it caused such a big commotion. It was none other than because Qianjin Shinran sensed his arrival. He also felt the powerful power of the two Shinran dragons, and woke up from his deep sleep. However, when he woke up, he found that he had been trapped for a long time. Previously, the in-laws were able to trap him for such a long time only because he had not woken up yet. Since he had woken up, there was no way to trap him anymore. Without the arrival of Qianyu, Qianjin Shenron would have reappeared sooner or later. At that time, the entire Jin family would not be able to protect themselves. What do you know? What Shenron bloodline? Don't talk nonsense. There's no Shenron here. Looking at their attitude, Qianyu already understood in his heart. It seemed that they had already guessed it. No wonder that as a family that hid so deeply and had so much power, they had never discovered that what they had been suppressing was related to Shenron. Because they had discovered it, but pretended not to know so that they could gain more benefits for themselves. Things have come to this point. Do you think you can continue to hide it? Why don't you hand it over to me when he is still weak? It will just save you from the crisis. It will also release the shackles that have been on you. As a family with great power, but you can't appear in front of everyone and openly show your strength. Have you ever felt the slightest bit unwilling? All the ancestral elders were silent. How could they not feel the slightest bit unwilling? Wasn't it all for the sake of long-term development? Don't be fooled by the fact that they all held great power in their hands. But in essence, it was for their descendants. This was why they worked hard generation after generation. But this was also something that Qianyu strongly disagreed with. The family could also develop very well, although there was no scene of a family in the Jin world for the time being. But with their strength and foundation, if they wanted to develop and grow, it was not difficult to have a very high voice. Therefore, it was inevitable that they would be tempted by what Qianyu said. It was just that between the two, they were still unwilling to let go. After all, this was related to Shenron. Everyone in the world knew that all the things related to Shenron were rare in the world. As long as they could get a little bit of it, they would already benefit immensely. Qianyu was not in a hurry, but he was also unwilling to waste his effort. In his opinion, these people would agree to him sooner or later, because they did not have any other choice. The Qianjin Divine Dragon was not someone who was willing to submit to others. These people still did not know the origin of Qianjin Shenron. If they knew, they would not hesitate at all. Otherwise, they would completely offend Shenron. When the time came, it would be difficult for them to escape the fate of destruction. The third elder's heart tightened. He suddenly thought of the deduction of half of the good and half of the bad. Perhaps it was because of this choice that it was half and half. I support it. This thing has become a scourge for us. If it continues to stay, it will only affect us one after another. Have you forgotten how much damage this guy will bring to us after he moves? It could escape their control before. A trace of its aura had caused a huge change within a radius of 10,000 miles. If it continued to drag on, all of them would not have a good ending. The third elder had always been the best at deduction, in addition to the previous efforts. In the end, the ancestral elders gritted their teeth and decided to agree. But in the end, they decided to delay it until tomorrow and see the results. Chapter 1036. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. A ball of golden light. Suddenly, it began to grow a long tail and small 5 claws. Towering dragon horns grew out, and the dragon scales on its body were faintly discernible. The ancestral elders all spat out a mouthful of blood. Not good, it's a riot. With all of their powers combined, they should have been able to barely keep it under control. But at this moment, it suddenly lost its effect. Not only could they not suppress this huge power, moreover, all of them were sent flying by this huge force. If it wasn't for the fact that this was an extremely secluded place, usually, no one would come here at all. Then their sorry state could be seen at a glance. The ancestral elders had always been extremely powerful in the eyes of others. It was rare for them to be in such a sorry state. Even the butler was somewhat affected, even if he was just standing on the periphery. Only Qianyu was not affected. Even Shualon next to him was completely covered. This power did not affect them. Qin Yu slowly walked over under the gaze of the ancestral elders. He held the ball of light that had not fully grown in his hand. The ball of light that had already grown into the shape of a dragon was still struggling, unwilling to be caught. It faintly revealed a few roars, which already had the power of Shenron. But after all, it was still very weak. After being caught in his hand, it had no ability to resist. Essence blood. The young dragon roared as if it did not understand anything. He was a little confused as he used his own teeth to tear at it. But the huge power of its body could not be underestimated. Although the power of its bite was much weaker than when it was at its strongest when it was an adult. But for people with ordinary strength, it was enough to seriously injure them. Qin Yu grabbed Qianjin Shenron's reverse scale with a backhand. Your current strength is too weak. You have no room to resist. With your current strength, you're so weak that I can crush you with one hand. Qianjin Shenron could not continue to pretend to be crazy. He was extremely powerful to begin with, but because he had been asleep for too long, unknowingly, he had returned to his original state and returned to such a weak state. If he was given enough time to grow into an adult again, his strength would definitely rise to a higher level, comprehending the heavens and earth, and even integrating the golden realm into his body, becoming a part of himself. Unfortunately, he didn't have enough time to grow. If he didn't hand over the blood essence now, everything he had done before would be in vain. He was absolutely not willing to waste so much time like this. Especially after that, who knew how long it would take for him to obtain such a mysterious opportunity again. Perhaps in the end, he would be the slowest of the 9 Shenron universities. This was something he could not tolerate. I can give you the essence blood, and I won't set any tests. I just need you to add one more condition to the contract. If you want to protect me until I reach adulthood, I'm willing to sign a master-servant contract without harming my life. A wise man submits to circumstances. Moreover, he was well aware that Qin Yu already had 2 Shenron experts by his side. This also meant that he didn't have much room to display his abilities. However, if they were to sign a master-servant contract, things would be different. Qianjin Shenron was sure that no other Shenron was as reckless as him. As long as it didn't harm his life, he didn't care if it took tens of thousands of years. Anyway, he wasn't the first Shenron to choose to submit to him. Qianjin Shenron fiercely grabbed himself. However, only a drop of essence blood that shone like gold flowed out. I, Qianjin Shenron, swear on my life that I will follow Qin Yu and do my best to give up everything without harming my life. There were no loopholes in the oath of following. Although there was a prerequisite of not harming his life, he had much less freedom than Sora Shenron and Kanshue Shenron. However, in the current situation, he had to do this. When Akira Kaneko heard that name, he looked at the elders in disbelief. How could they be so bold as to trap the sleeping Shenron? If they could succeed, it would be fine, but they weren't strong enough. He didn't even dare to think about what would happen if Qin Yu didn't appear. Their family would definitely be destroyed because of these people. Greed was a deadly evil. It was enough to destroy the accumulation of countless people for generations. Fortunately, all of this was over now. The 3rd elder couldn't help but feel lucky that he had made the right choice. If he had hesitated at that time and told the others a little, it definitely wouldn't have been as perfect as it was now. The biggest hidden danger had been eliminated. Although they had lost a lot, who knew if this would make them determined to make a new beginning? The Jin family wasn't finished so easily. Qianjin Shenron had already made the oath, so he naturally wasn't going to do anything to these people. What they did only had a little impact on Qianjin Shenron. He also knew that without these people, it might not be so easy for him to sign the oath. But in the end, he would only be fleeing everywhere. Perhaps it would be more troublesome, but the result would be the same. Qin Yu originally had 2 Shenron by his side. It was extremely easy to find his location. Sorry, we didn't recognize the pearl before. They originally thought that it was just a rare creature with Shenron's bloodline. Perhaps it was a young dragon embryo, but they just didn't expect it to be Shenron himself. Perhaps all the records about Shenron had completely misled them. All the records about Shenron generally had statements like covering the sky and covering the sun. This made them ignore the fact that Shanran could return to its original state. When the strength of some experts reached a certain level, it would also have the effect of returning to its original state. The elders all went over to apologize, but everyone knew in their hearts that the one who could really control all of this was Qinyu, not Xianjin Shinran, who had taken the initiative to work for Qinyu. One master and one servant, their status could be imagined. There's no need to say more about this matter. My purpose of coming here has been accomplished, and your crisis has been resolved. I'm not going to stay any longer. Qinyu didn't know what they were thinking, but since the matter had been completed, there was no need to stay any longer. No matter what they wanted to get with the power of Shinran, or they wanted to keep him to achieve their own goals. He couldn't stay here for long. Akira Kaneko took the initiative to walk over with a complicated expression. Originally, he thought that although he would be inferior to Qinyu, but he never thought that the gap between the two of them would be so big. Qinyu could easily order Shinran around and use Shinran as a servant. And until now, he only had the title of heir. What undefeated legend! That was the case when the experts didn't make a move. Thinking about it, he felt ashamed. Chapter 1037. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation. If you come again in the future, I'll definitely find something even better for you. Also, the sky cloud bamboo I took from you before, it's time to pay you back. Before, it was because he didn't have enough money, but now it was much better. At the very least, he could only take a portion of the clan's resources. However, when the elders heard about this, they waved their hands and bought it all. A living sky cloud bamboo was a good thing for the clan. At most, they would give a portion of it to Akira Kaneko as a reward. As for the money, of course, they would pay for it, and the item would fall into the hands of the clan. More people would benefit, and for Akira Kaneko, it was a good choice. At the very least, it would reduce the pressure on him. He didn't have to pay such a large sum of money, and he could get a portion of it for free. I don't care what you think. There's no reason for me to ask for money for something I've given away. Akira Kaneko felt quite moved, even though it wasn't much to Qinyu. But to him, this was a very, very important thing. It was even related to what he could achieve in the future. Of course, he could not give something so important to him. Even blood brothers had to settle accounts. The reward given to him by the clan belonged to the clan. Qinyu placed the item in his hands even before the clan gave him the money. This is a sign of trust. How about this? You still have a lot of useless things, so how about we make an exchange? Whether it's for money or other things, it's fine. Even though you might not be interested in most of the things, please take a look. Qinyu didn't refuse. This was a win-win situation. Of course, it was just as Akira Kaneko had said. Most things were treasures in the eyes of others, but they were useless to him. He already had a lot of things, and any more would just be icing on the cake. The actual effect will be next to nothing. However, this time, he found a hibiscus snow lotus that was extremely suitable for Shulan. Legend had it that the hibiscus snow lotus was an extremely precious item. Its main effect was to focus one's mind and calm one's qi, eliminate all distracting thoughts, and sense the origin of this world. Shulan had originally cultivated the Tao of great oblivion. The so-called Taishang indifference was not truly abandoning all feelings. Instead, it was to maintain a calm heart and treat everything in the world as equal. It would be best if he could be emotionless to all things, yet still have feelings for this world. It seemed extremely contradictory. However, the main point was to get rid of all distracting thoughts and allow one's heart to return to its most basic state. All of her feelings came from the bottom of her heart. Not a single frown or smile was excessive. Without any external influence, it was pure and genuine. He had already cultivated the supreme indifference to the extreme. Shulan was almost done, but her understanding of the world was still slightly lacking. With the help of the hibiscus snow lotus, this last bit of regret would disappear. At that time, he would be able to cultivate to perfection again. He was only a sliver away from the realm of great success. Although this hibiscus snow lotus is precious, It can't be compared to the things you gave me." The ancestral elders were all terrified. Originally, when Akira Kaneko spoke, he didn't think much of it. He really saw the huge pile of things that was piled up like a mountain. Among them, he found many dimly glowing treasures. There were also some good things that even they were extremely envious of. They were allowed to choose any of these things. Even if they were all emptied, Chinyu wouldn't feel the slightest bit of heartache. After all, he had a lot of small mountains like this. He didn't care about a little bit of it anymore. At first glance, those things that weren't considered supreme had already been piled up like a huge pile of trash. At first glance, it was extremely chaotic. Only by looking carefully could one find countless treasures inside. However, Chinyu only took a fancy to a hibiscus snow lotus. The others felt a little hopeless. They had taken a fancy to too many good things. With the idea of an equivalent exchange, they wanted to build a good relationship with Chinyu. That was to try their best to pay more. But now, Chinyu didn't want anything from them at all. And with such a calm attitude, he only took a hibiscus snow lotus. They were really embarrassed to take what they wanted. Big Brother took a fancy to a flag that had the ability to store and attack as one. Third Brother took a fancy to an 8-trigram star sea plate. This thing would be of great help to his future deductions. It could even help him breathe and heal his injuries. There was nothing better for him than this. Akira Kaneko already had something in his hands, but he still took a fancy to some more. This armor was not bad. That boxing glove was not bad. If he went to the arena with these, he would definitely be able to stabilize his position. But he only took a look and was too embarrassed to ask. Most people were like him, taking a fancy to these things, but were too embarrassed to ask for them. "I only need this one. If you feel bad, you can exchange it for money." It just so happened that he also had the intention of counting the currencies of various worlds. If he came again in the future, he would be considered a rich man. At least he wouldn't have to wander around with natural treasures. Otherwise, it would be easy to be targeted and cause a lot of trouble. With all kinds of currencies, it would save him a lot of trouble. Moreover, purple gold had to be made with extremely special and precious ores. It wasn't completely worthless. Not only could it be used as currency, but it could also be used as a rare material. It was extremely good to be used to make some other things. The ancestral elders all knew that these things couldn't be bought with money. None of them had any objections. They ran around and began to choose and then estimate their value. Chinyu wasn't afraid that they would take the things and run away. He let them recognize him as their master on the spot and test the power of these treasures. Some of the treasures were the most valuable. In the end, after using them, they found that none of them were trash. As long as they were used properly, they were all treasures that could be used to great effect. It was because of this that they paid an extra sum of money in the end, although they knew that this money was useless to Chinyu. But if they didn't do this, they would be too embarrassed to take such good things. Then it's over. The transaction this time around ended when Chinyu took back the small mountain of items. The ancestral elders spent a lot of money and barely bought one or two things that they liked. Everyone was holding one or two things in their hands. Of course, they had to fork out a lot of money for their own things. In other words, only those scattered items of low value were for the younger generation to use. Of course, they all had a common characteristic, which was that they were extremely rare. So even if the value wasn't high, in the end, it was still a considerable price. Chapter 1038. In the end, most of the items were settled in purple gold. In the end, even the wealthy Jean family had to mobilize as much as they could before they were barely able to mobilize enough purple coins. Currently, the Jean family only had a few million purple gold in their inventory. This made the elders feel regret and reluctantly let go. At the end, they wanted to knock on the carriage to ask. They wanted to know Chinyu's next itinerary and when he would be able to make such a deal with them again, even though they took out a lot of purple gold. But in the end, they got even more. These things could not be bought with money anywhere else. To be able to obtain so many precious items in just one go, he had to be extremely grateful. Even if they had to pay a high price, they still made a huge profit. I don't know how long it will be before I come back. I've already achieved my goal. There's no need to stay. Maybe after I become a true god, I'll come back to this place. Some time had already passed. However, the dark clouds that everyone could see still hadn't dissipated. It was 2 times more powerful than when it first appeared. Anyone who looked at it would feel their heart jump. Those who were weak could not feel the pressure from the strong power. The stronger they were, the more they did not dare to peek at that realm. Normal people dared to casually talk about it. They even dared to use the name of true god to make up some harmless stories. But true experts never had the guts. The 2 words true god to them touched some kind of rule. Before they were strong enough, at least before they came into contact with that place, they could not peek. The strongest elder in the Gene family already had the power of a half-step true god. But he was too old, and he knew it. If he wanted to take another step forward, he would definitely end up dead. He could only look at the person going through the tribulation under the dark clouds with envious eyes. But he did not even dare to think about when he would go through the tribulation. Could it be that you are here for the mystical dragon? To most people, Shinran was a legendary existence. Akira Kaneko suddenly felt that maybe his guess was right. The reason why Qin Yu suddenly came here from the beginning was because of Shenlong. However, even he himself felt that this guess might be a little too exaggerated. But perhaps that was the truth. A series of impossibilities were eliminated. The last possibility must be the truth. All the clues pointed to this. Akira Kaneko could only guess. His feelings became even more complicated after getting the tacit approval of his guess. He also wanted to possess extremely powerful abilities one day. He could even directly control the fate of Shinran. Shinran, the 9 great origins. I have to gather all of them. Qin Yu said this in his heart, but he didn't say it out loud. After all, Shinran alone had already brought them great pressure. If they knew more, who knew what kind of blow they would receive? Now that Jin Ziyao's fighting spirit had been aroused, he would just let him continue to misunderstand. He believed that as long as he had the strength, he would be able to make Shinran bow to him. Of course, this wasn't a complete misunderstanding. He had the same strength and talent as him. Indeed, he could make Shinran bow to him. It was just that he couldn't find a second one in this world. One day, I will come and find you. Tell me which divine realm you often stay in. I will go find you when the time comes. Qin Yu didn't think much about this. However, he had already been to several divine realms. He wasn't far from going to all of them. If he wanted to find him, it might be the same no matter where he went. The most powerful and mysterious person who could turn the world upside down was usually him. You will know when you go to the other divine realms. In the Golden Realm, he stirred up a small storm alone. Things went very smoothly, and the world didn't know his name. However, in many arenas there was such a legend of an expert who came from another world and only stayed for a few days. It was said that he also had the position of the deacon of the Qianyuan arena. However, since then, he never appeared again. Therefore, only a small part of the legend was left behind. Perhaps it was the special nature of the Golden Realm. It wasn't easy to find a place where the space was stable and could leave. Most of them were places where the arenas were seated. However, there were too many people. If he left in public, it would be troublesome. Although Qin Yu was about to leave, he didn't want countless people to talk about him here. Fortunately, it didn't take long for him to find a place with few people and stable space. This place used to be a burial ground. However, the space was stable and was extremely suitable for teleportation. There were very few places that were so suitable for teleportation. After teleporting to the place, this time, he didn't teleport to a place with too many people. He didn't teleport to any dangerous place. Instead, he was in the deepest part of an alley. This was a dead end. There was only one way that led to the outside. It was also extremely dark. The people outside wouldn't notice any movement here. They wouldn't notice that there was an extra person here for no reason. Where is this? Feeling the hot air around him, Qin Yu more or less had a guess in his heart. He didn't set a fixed coordinate. After all, he hadn't been to other divine realms. How could he set an accurate location? He just casually connected to an unfamiliar place and teleported directly. Since it was an unfamiliar place, it wouldn't be a divine realm he had been to before. However, only when he reached the place could he know where this place was based on the surroundings and what the people around him said. Clearly, if there were no accidents, this was Flame World. The air was so hot, but people came and went on the streets. Everyone's clothing wasn't thin, but rather thick. Qianjin Shenron didn't know if it was to show off or for other reasons. When he felt the environment here, he suddenly reminded him. Flame World often has fiery rock rain. Why don't we find a place to hide? Of course, with master strength, you can easily endure it. However, it will be troublesome. Also, if it rains, it will take at least a day. The environment of Flame World could be said to be very bad. However, the people here were clearly familiar with the environment here. As expected, not long after, there were strange movements in the sky. They didn't feel any pressure, but the surrounding air became hotter. When the fiery rocks fell, they caused the surrounding buildings to be full of holes. However, all of them were very experienced in finding a place to hide. Clearly, they were used to it, and it would happen occasionally. Those luxurious and sturdy tea houses and restaurants became the first choice. Chapter 1039. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Go. This place doesn't accept just anyone. You have to pay the price first before you can come in. When Xinyu arrived, the shopkeeper was chasing away a group of people who were begging to sit inside. They looked a little haggard and were relatively weak, although the rain of fire outside was not very strong. However, for those who were weak, it was still a disaster that was neither too big nor too small. If there was no place for them to stay, they could avoid this extremely dangerous rain. They would more or less be injured. I beg you, please let us hide inside for a while. There's really no place to stay outside. Let me go in and hide. There were also those who were more lively. They seemed to be sandwiched in the crowd and kept begging, but their eyes darted around very quickly. When the shopkeeper was not paying attention, they directly rushed in. Their intentions were not too obvious. They were going to find a place to hide while it was chaotic. As long as no one could find them, they could go out after the rain was over. Their only chance. It was too dangerous outside. This was not ordinary rain. At most, they would catch a cold when the water poured on them. They could dry them up with a casual dry. But it was very difficult to put out the fire. People could be drenched in water, but they could not be drenched in fire. Otherwise, they would be burned to ashes. Every time it rained, there would be a group of people who would be burned to ashes. Among these people, there were ordinary people and homeless wanderers. But no matter who it was, they did not want to be the next person to be burned to ashes. The shopkeeper was extremely good at dealing with such situations. Just as he lowered his head and did not care anymore, many guards rushed in one after another, blocking every possible loophole that could be taken advantage of. No matter how these people wailed, they continued to wail. The shopkeeper was just calculating how much profit this rain would bring to them. Xinyu walked to the door and was stopped by the guards. Those guards were just some vulgar martial artists. They did not know what good things were. They only knew that those who had not paid were not allowed to enter. Moreover, they had always been arrogant. No one had ever been more arrogant than them. In addition, the shopkeeper was calculating how much income he might get this time, so he didn't pay attention to them. Each and every one of them regarded themselves as half the owners of the tea house. His attitude was naturally not good, and he could be said to be extremely arrogant. Get the money before you go in. If you don't have enough money, it's better not to go in. Ha ha ha. Does he not know how much money he has to fork out to get in? Qin Yu's expression was calm. These people were simply too weak. It was impossible to make him even slightly angry. Because the two were not on the same level at all. What could these guards know? They didn't know anything. They only knew that they were very impressive right now. I really don't know how much it costs. That's why I came to ask. It was just some insolent words that would not really make him angry. However, when the children started to cry, the guard became ferocious. He couldn't take it anymore when he kicked out a child who was only a child. These were ordinary people. It was just that this rain was too unexpected. That was why they were caught off guard, and could only find a temporary place to stay. However, when they found a place, they were blocked outside the door. If they were only blocked outside the door, it wouldn't be much of a hindrance. Although the firestone rain had been falling and it was very difficult to stop, as long as there was a place to stay for a moment. For the mother and son, it was already extremely rare. They didn't ask for anything else. They had always been the quietest, and they didn't play any tricks. However, it was this quietness that was regarded as something to be bullied. Those who couldn't get in, those who had bad tempers, and those who couldn't find a place to stay. They all targeted the mother and son. Although they only stared at them with unfriendly eyes, the child was so scared that he cried loudly. The guards kicking the child out at this time was equivalent to strangling a life. It was clear at a glance who was right and who was wrong in this matter. However, no one stopped them, and it was ruining human relations. I've already given you a chance to reason with me. It's a pity that you gave up the chance I gave you and are unwilling to listen to reason. Then let's use other methods to solve it. The woman carried her child over. Her tears couldn't stop falling. She kept calling him Bauer. In the end, Shualon still couldn't bear it. This pair of mother and son were not evil people and had been extremely honest from the beginning to the end. She simply rummaged through her body and found a small bottle of pills that tasted better. Perhaps it was a coincidence that it could be used to temper the body. Of course, this kind of basic medicine was nothing to them. Chinyu had countless bottles and jars in his hands, but he never cared about them, not to mention some basic body-tempering items. After receiving these 2 pills, the mother and son were even more grateful. However, in the end, they suddenly saw others coveting these 2 pills. Suddenly, they made up their minds and poured out a pill. They directly stuffed it into their son's mouth and kept hugging it. This way, the covetous eyes at the side became slightly calmer. The things were already gone. No matter how much they wanted it, they couldn't get it. Why did they have to cause so much trouble for themselves? The few guards still hadn't figured out the situation. They even thought that they were facing an ordinary person. They didn't notice that Chinyu's speed just now had exceeded that of ordinary people. Almost in the blink of an eye, he brought back a child from the rain of fire unscathed. Especially at this moment, the rain was getting heavier and denser. Even powerful people didn't dare to go out and walk around easily. Chinyu is able to walk in the rain with ease and is completely unharmed. It was already something that no one present could resist, because all the people who chose to take refuge didn't have the ability to protect themselves. At least, they couldn't be safe and sound in the dense rain of fire. Don't poke your nose into other people's business here. These people didn't pay, so they shouldn't be kept. They didn't pay. We can drive them away if we want to. It all depends on our mood. Where did you come from? We are the leaders here, and our strength is also the best around. Do you think your ability can compare to ours? Chinyu didn't even bother to draw his sword. Using these people to train himself was really a kind of pollution. Our strength can't be compared, because you are too weak. There are no fancy moves, just pure strength. The powerful strength was compressed to the extreme and exploded in an instant. The smiles on the faces of the guards who were of average strength were completely frozen. The faces of the few people who bore the brunt of it were even completely disfigured. Chapter 1040. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Even if they died without dignity and became a few disgusting charred corpses. The shopkeeper had just finished calculating his account book when a powerful force suddenly spread over here. Even the thick account book in his hand was smashed into pieces. It would take a lot of effort to reorganize it. The shopkeeper was furious and was about to ask who did it. But when he looked up, he saw a few corpses. Just now, he was immersed in the accounts and didn't notice the commotion here. Or it could be said that no matter how big the commotion here was, it had nothing to do with him. It was nothing more than these guards making the decision on their own. Anyway, these people were just a group of low-class people in his eyes. No matter how presumptuous they were, it had nothing to do with him. But now, things seemed to have gotten out of hand. Chinyu's strength surpasses ordinary people at a glance. The shopkeeper also had some strength. But to be able to reach the position of shopkeeper, he relied on his own ability to calculate accounts. Also, he was loyal to her. The account book that came out of his hands never had a mistake. So although he was the biggest shopkeeper here, he didn't have much strength. At least when facing Chinyu, he couldn't help but be a little inferior. At the moment, there was no one more powerful here. The rain of fire blocked the passage to a certain extent. If it wasn't a big deal, offending an unknown powerhouse for a few guards. This deal wasn't worth it. The shopkeeper kept calculating in his heart, and there was a smile on his face. Although the death of the guards was embarrassing for him. But now, he wasn't going to care about it. If he cared, he might become one of the corpses. He was very clear about this deal. Please sit here first. I promise to arrange the best seat for you. May I know why you're here? If it's not convenient for me to ask, then forget it. I'm not a talkative person. Just like an ordinary, hospitable old shopkeeper. But he was still partly responsible for what happened just now. The rest of the people wouldn't be chased away. Chinyu didn't stop. He could do this, but he wouldn't stand up for these people for no reason. Among these people who hid under the eaves, there weren't many good people. There weren't many innocent people in this world. Ordinary people might be innocent, but they were too weak. And the strong were those with a certain level of strength, which one of them didn't have some blood on their hands. Just now, Chinyu couldn't stand seeing that the child was about to die. That's why, now that he had left, there were still a few people with ugly expressions on their faces. Their mouths were also full of filthy curses. Of course, they didn't dare to curse Chinyu, and they didn't have the guts. But they kept cursing the shop. There was clearly such a big place. So what if he just randomly arranged a place for them to stay? At most, they could just stay. Everyone were all to everyone to take shelter from the rain. Who was who? Receiving experts, but not being willing to give them even the slightest bit of space was simply going too far. Translation. Translation is translation. Translation. His that translation. 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 His translation. 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 The translations is translation. Could that's that was that. Apart from the things besides to that, the treatment was already very good. It was almost according to the highest standard. Even if the owner came in person, he could only get this. The shopkeeper also had an abacus in his heart, which was crackling and rattling. The abacus in his hand was just a toy. It was also a kind of prop. The abacus in his heart had already allowed him to calculate everything clearly. Since Chinyu chose to take shelter from the rain at his place for the time being. With such powerful strength, it was obvious that he had something on hand. As long as this period of time passed, after a while, he definitely wouldn't be stingy with a little bit of money. When the time came, as long as he paid enough, he could be considered to have safely passed the crisis. If he couldn't pay enough money, then it didn't matter. Anyway, when the rain stopped, his backer should be here. To be able to build a restaurant and tea house that could completely avoid the rain of fire and stones. How could there not be some backers behind them? Without so many backers, they couldn't build it. They couldn't find so many good materials. There was no way they could stay safe and settle down like this. Did you have any insights from the scene just now? Chinyu didn't make a move without reason. Although at first, he did want to temporarily save the child. After all, the child was innocent. No matter what others did, at least he wouldn't easily watch an innocent child die under his nose. It was also because of the arrogance and despotism of a group of people. But later on, he had other plans. At a higher level, although strength was important. But for a super genius like him, it wasn't a troublesome thing to improve his level. The state of mind was what he valued more. Occasionally experiencing some trivial things in the world could also help improve his state of mind. In particular, Shualan had always been cold and cheerless. This kind of personality had both advantages and disadvantages. The advantage was that it could eliminate all distracting thoughts and be single-minded. It was clear that it could pursue what it wanted to pursue. The disadvantage was that it was too cold to everything in the world. It was easy to end up as a monster without any feelings. Although this possibility was very low, Shualan was not completely unfettered. But more insights were still of great help to the improvement of the state of mind. Xiaolan thought of the scene just now and muttered in her heart. She'd have some insights, but it wasn't too deep. Although the child was pitiful, this was the law of the jungle in the world. That mother was obviously used to it. So the moment she got the body-tempering elixir, she immediately gave it to her child, instead of finding a safe environment. Of course, there would be a certain danger in taking the precious elixir in such a chaotic environment. But if he didn't take it, after that, he might not even have such an opportunity again. After all, there wouldn't always be someone by his side to help him. For most of the week, this was a life-saving measure. It was also the principle that they had always pursued. You're not wrong in saying that. There's a law of the jungle in the world, but it doesn't mean that the jungle is always right. There are thousands of principles in the world. Why is the law of the jungle so deeply ingrained? This is because the strong in the world are happy to see such a scene, and the combined strength of ordinary people is still not to be underestimated. After following me to a few places, you should have noticed that the ninefold divine realm is like a multifaceted mirror that can change constantly. It depends on how you understand and operate it. In the end, the strong had the final say, but there are also many possibilities in this world. Chapter 1041. The Tao of this world was too complicated. Ordinary people could understand what was happening. They were already the best among the strong. If they could understand a few percent of it, they would dominate a region and be passed down through the ages. It was just that there were too few people like that. As a member of the world, there was no way to see their own situation clearly. Every single one of them was a member of all living beings. It was already a blessing in life to be able to see a little bit of it clearly, not to mention the deeper analysis ability to get to the bottom of it. But Qin Yu's words at least dissected a part of the truth of the world. It was still a little lacking to say that it was a complete revelation. But if one thought about it carefully, they could figure out more principles. Xiaolan was also a person who understood with a hint. She was smart and thorough and could infer many things from one example. The more she thought about it, the more she felt that there were many principles to follow. You can think about it yourself. After all, we are not in a hurry. It was unknown how long it would take for Xiantian Shenzhen to break through. And before Xiantian Shenzhen reached true God, they still had a lot of time to spend on the road. Perhaps it would be a good experience to walk around and see more things. No one could say for sure what would happen in the next moment. Because of these words, Xiaolan also tacitly agreed to walk and stop on the road. Although it was a bit of a waste of time, it was also a good experience. Whether it was for Xiaolan or for Qinyu, everything in this world followed its own principles, whether it was plants, living creatures, or humans. Since it was born in this world, there was a reason for its birth. Whether it was a human, a demon, or a spirit of heaven and earth, it was just a part of this world. It was also a part of the path to pursue. The more they walked and looked, the more they understood. Now that they were facing a crisis, the guests were all kinds of people. After walking around, they also observed many human principles that they had never noticed before. This was the way of survival of the human race. The law of the jungle was an eternal principle, but other than that, there were many other principles that could not be ignored. Among them, the one that left the deepest impression was blood ties. Of course, it was not impossible for relatives to turn against each other. Most of them were caused by greed. However, there was still a small number of them who had no choice but to turn against their loved ones for various reasons. It wasn't because he was greedy, but because he had no other choice, in order not to implicate the people close to him. Of course, the probability of this happening was small, but how many people were there in the world? Let's talk about it in greater detail. Every living being had their own way of living. Everyone was an indispensable part of this world. I understand. Heaven and earth are merciless, treating all living things like straw dogs. Heaven and earth have no morals, and happiness, anger, sorrow, and joy all affect all living things. Heaven and earth are unfair, and choose the chosen ones to walk on blood. He stood in the midst of all the living beings. as a member of the multitude of living beings. For the first time, Shualan felt the emotions of the people around her. However, when she sensed it, she was also moved. In the end, she was still able to calmly feel the emotions of countless people, as well as all their experiences. Whether it was joy or pain, they were all just passers-by. In the end, the supreme great Tao that she cultivated had achieved some small success, and she had stepped onto the path of perfection. Unable to contain her joy, she opened her eyes. The thousands of words in Shualan's heart gathered into a word of thanks. There's no need to be polite between you and me. I just felt a little. After going to different worlds, he was used to the difference between the strong and the weak. He had seen all kinds of people and things, whether it was fair or unfair, friendship or family, contributing to the family, harming people for personal gain. The difference between people was too big, but it couldn't arouse his emotions in the slightest. It was just that after seeing so much, his state of mind had achieved some small success. He improved it a little more. This would be of great help to him breaking through to the true God realm in the future. When he became an immortal, he still had to ask himself and experience all kinds of tests of the state of mind. If he wanted to break through to the true God realm, one could imagine that there would be a test of the mind. He just had a small feeling in advance. The special rain outside had stopped. Many people walked out of the door. They continued to do what they had to do. The damaged houses would then slowly repair the damaged roads. Soon, someone would use this pile of materials to fill the hole in public. Not long after, it would be brand new again. On the contrary, it looked more beautiful than before the fire rain. The entire street looked brand new. And all of this was done in an extremely short period of time. When he went back again, Qin Yu paid a sum of money. He just walked past a pawn shop. He casually pawned some inconspicuous but valuable pills in his hand. These things were naturally useless to him. They were completely a pile of trash. After all, he wouldn't be injured. These injuries medicine were just casually thrown in. It was completely useless. In this way, in addition to purple coins, he had a lot more money in his hands. At least if they stayed for a long time, the two of them wouldn't have to worry about food and drink. It wouldn't be a problem to save up a fortune. But unfortunately, his ambition wasn't here. After paying the room fee, he left directly. There was no point in continuing to stay. It was better to go out and take a look at the outside world. Wouldn't it be more exciting? He came here for Shinran. But now there was one more thing, which was to see everything in the world, to see the experience of ordinary people. After taking the hibiscus snow lotus, Shualan's temperament was even more noble and profound. Walking on the road, he attracted a lot of attention. He came to the next town again, but as soon as he stepped in, he was surrounded by enthusiastic townspeople. They called Qin Yu the hierarch. They even called Shualan the saintess with incomparable respect. And their attitude didn't seem to be fake. Instead, they seemed to be very familiar with them. However, what was fake was still fake. They were just newcomers. How could they have the title of hierarch or saintess? It was as if these people treated them as two other people. Although they had always used the best attitude, the most amiable and the most fearful expression, their every move made people unable to find anything wrong. But it was because of this that it seemed a little strange. Interesting. No matter how he tried to defend himself, it was of no use. Qin Yu simply didn't continue to explain himself. Obviously, these people were pretending to be confused, but he didn't know what their purpose was. Then follow them and see what they want to do. The townspeople prepared the most luxurious rooms. Everything was prepared properly. However, it was not too outrageous. It was the best that a small town could come up with. From them, Qin Yu learned that he was the hierarch of the 100 Spirits sect, and Shualan was the saintess of the 100 Spirits sect. Chapter 1042. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Mayor, is this really going to work? Letting two outsiders be the leader and the saintess. Qin Yu stood outside the door and listened to what they thought was a safe conversation. The kind elder who wanted to meet his relatives during the day and had arranged everything. At this moment, his expression was solemn, and there was no lack of gloominess. We have to do it even if it doesn't work. The real leader and the saintess died a long time ago from practicing evil techniques. Do you want everyone to know that the Hundred Spirits sect is actually an evil sect? Then what about the benefits we received in the name of the Hundred Spirits sect? Are we going to return them all? As the conversation went on, the quarrel became more and more intense. As time gradually passed, Chinyu learned a lot of things from them. The leader and the saintess of the Hundred Spirits sect died from chi deviation while practicing evil techniques. Before they suffered chi deviation, they went into seclusion every day. They wholeheartedly wanted to improve their strength. The reason why the Hundred Spirits sect was established so carelessly. It was also the result of the mayor's arrangements. After that, the two of them often went into seclusion and didn't care about anything. It was as if he had taken over all the power. He took over everything and recruited a lot of believers. In the end, he gained countless benefits. Anyway, the leader and the saintess didn't care about anything. He just needed to use their names. But not long ago, the two of them died from chi deviation. After that, he was about to lose his main source of income. Their corpses were extremely hideous because of chi deviation and couldn't see the light of day. Because the two of them often went into seclusion, not many people knew them. As a result, it was so easy and convenient to change dynasties now. The hearts of the people were not what they used to be. It was hard to imagine such a kind and trustworthy elder. He actually established an evil sect, and the things he did were also extremely terrifying. He actually used the offerings of these ordinary people to scheme for himself. Chinyu even sensed the smell of human blood on him. The real person who practiced evil techniques was probably the mayor. How trustworthy could his words be? He was just a big liar from the beginning to the end. According to you, how should we deal with this matter? It was rare for Xuelan to want to participate in these things. She didn't like to participate in these things, because to her, participating in it was basically a waste of time. But now, because of a different understanding of the world, he had become much more optimistic than before. At the very least, he was no longer icy cold, as if he was a block of ice in front of outsiders. Instead, he had his own emotions, although they were relatively shallow. Of course, this was a further tempering of his mental state. He didn't really change his personality in an instant. In essence, she was still the original Xuelan. Let's leave this matter alone for now. Don't you want to know what they're up to? Xuelan was a little confused. She really couldn't guess what these people wanted to do. Looking for outsiders was obviously not a long-term solution. Sooner or later, they would be exposed. Since it wasn't a long-term plan, why would the mayor do this? If it was for the sake of being open and above board, in order to arrange the identities of the sect master and the holy maiden, they could find ordinary people to temporarily replace them. At worst, he could just dress up a little and appear in front of others occasionally. Why did he have to drag the others along with him? Furthermore, he was a complete stranger to her, yet he wasn't afraid that she would be threatened. He wasn't afraid that everything would be exposed one day. Of course, he's not afraid. Although his words are extravagant, he has already thought about how to get rid of the stumbling block in his heart. It doesn't matter who is the sect master and the holy maiden. The most important thing is that he needs the sect master and the holy maiden to leave the public sight in a reasonable way. In that way, he can sit back and enjoy the fruits of others' labor. He can justifiably become a tyrant. It involved too many people's hearts. Originally, she thought that a person could have so many faces. He was kind and amiable in front of ordinary people. He was honest and trustworthy in front of people who also knew his background. There was also the ruthless and poisonous scorpion hiding in the deepest dark. A person who had so many faces and didn't change them back and forth didn't find it tiring. Xuelan said her thoughts like this. If one had great strength, there was no need to do these fancy things. Just looking at it was already very tiring. But for some people with low strength, they wanted to have power, to have status, and to get everything that they envied. They needed to use such a complicated method. The reason was naturally because they weren't strong enough. They wanted to get those things that shouldn't belong to them. Suddenly, someone stepped on a leaf. However, the leaf that fell on the ground was already a little stiff. When one foot stepped on it, it made a very subtle cracking sound. Such a subtle sound was extremely obvious in the dark night. A fierce light flashed in the mayor's eyes. He rushed out quickly, but no one saw it. We must find out who came here. Focus on the two people who just came. Recently, there are also some people who are very restless. They always want to get to the bottom of it. Dig out all these people and get rid of them. We'd rather not leave any of them alive and make a mess. When the time comes, we can casually find a reason to shirk the responsibility. Then, no one will suspect us. Speaking of which, that leaf really wasn't stepped on by Yu and Shualon. It was someone else. An agile fatty kept shuttling back and forth. He barely crawled out of the tunnel that had been dug long ago. Before he could take 2 breaths, he felt a shadow on his body. He turned his head slightly stiffly. When he saw that it was Yu and the others, his heart was slightly relieved. I heard what that old guy said. You were innocently involved. You're not in cahoots with him. This guy is too evil. So many people in the village believe him, but I just don't. I think there must be a problem. Where did so much powerful holy water come from? Those who drank the holy water all turned into monsters, and they still firmly believe it. The little fatty really didn't seem to have any vigilance. He kept talking to himself and looked very relaxed. Suddenly, he disappeared in the blink of an eye. From the beginning to the end, Yu didn't feel the slightest bit surprised. From the beginning, he knew that the little fatty wasn't a simple person. Otherwise, how could he escape so quickly in such a short time? And he also cleaned up all the traces that he left behind. It was enough to show that he was a meticulous person. It was impossible for him to talk to himself in front of strangers without any vigilance, and even show his back. If he really did that, it could only mean that he deliberately showed weakness and had other intentions. The little fatty still couldn't escape. Since Yu had seen through it, he wouldn't give him a chance to escape. There were still some questions that hadn't been asked about the holy water and what happened in this town. Chapter 1043. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Little fatty didn't know much. Most of it was just his speculation. After all, the mayor didn't want anyone to have something on him, so he was extremely cautious when doing things. Other than himself, no one could be sure if he had done those things. According to Little Fatty's narration, he felt that the mayor might have planned the deaths of the previous leader and Holy Maiden. After all, he had always wanted to monopolize the power. It seemed very possible when he thought about it. But after thinking about it carefully, he knew that this matter didn't make sense. The mayor was a smart person. Since he was a smart person, he wouldn't do such a stupid thing. If he had done this, he wouldn't have been in a hurry to find a substitute. He even found someone who he didn't know the background of. It could be revealed that everything he said was false at any time. It was the same even if he had a lot of prestige. If it was a stranger he found casually, if he directly destroyed everything he had done, the gains wouldn't make up for the losses. But in the end, he still did it. And Little Fatty said that it was possible that the mayor had killed the previous leader. This was slightly possible, but it was also possible after thinking about it carefully. There are also many things that didn't make sense. The mayor wouldn't do such a stupid thing, because he knew that even if the 2 people died, as long as they didn't die openly, it would be troublesome for him. He would find a way to let these people die honorably and honorably. When the time came, as long as they showed their faces and died in an accident, wouldn't it be more honorable? And not like now. He was suspected by Little Fatty for no reason. In summary, it could only mean that Little Fatty wasn't telling the truth at all. He didn't say a word of truth from beginning to end. Everything he said was out of mistrust. After all, they were strangers and outsiders, and they were directly arranged to replace the leader's position. It was also possible that people would think that they were in cahoots with the mayor. Yu didn't explain to him. After hearing all this, he didn't let Little Fatty leave. Little Fatty was an agile fatty. He was very soft and gentle, and his body was as slippery as if he was smeared with oil. It was difficult to catch him, but this was nothing to Yu. He directly tied him with 3 or 4 layers of rope. No matter how slippery he was, he couldn't get through. He definitely couldn't run away. His size was there. Want to run? It would definitely cause some commotion. Little Fatty lowered his head, as if he had nothing to live for. In the end, he was reluctantly pulled back. The room where the leader and holy maiden stayed was very. It wasn't a big deal for dozens of people to stay. Fatty was thrown to the ground. Xuelon poured a cup of hot water for Qinyu. She chatted with him intermittently, and she completely leaving Little Fatty to the back of Little Fatty. Originally, Little Fatty should have been Fatty, but now he was translation especially, he translation until dawn translation Qinyu and Xuelon did not show any signs of fatigue the entire time. They Fatty translation, they're their translation as if. Little Fatty little translation. His strength wasn't high, and he had been on guard all night. It was inevitable that he was a little dispirited. It was obvious that he didn't sleep well at night, but there were threats everywhere around him. He also had to worry about whether he would be killed immediately. He really couldn't sleep well. Not to mention a good night's sleep, he couldn't wait to find a pillar and knock himself out. But the other end of the rope was always in Qinyu's hands. If he made any movements, Qinyu would be able to sense it immediately. After trying to slip away several times without success, Little Fatty translation had to give up. He couldn't slip away, nor could he run away. He couldn't even knock himself out by knocking himself into something. He could only beg for help. He hoped that Qinyu would let him go. But at this moment, he still didn't tell the truth. Although he was begging for mercy, he really couldn't hold on anymore. He didn't think about whether he could exchange his life for the truth. Although the mayor isn't a good person, how can you prove that you're not a bad person? There's a lot of double-crossing. If you don't tell the truth, you can stay in this room forever. After waiting for so many days, Little Fatty knew that every room was cleaned at a fixed time. If he stayed in this room forever, he would be discovered sooner or later. And the clothes he was wearing were the same ones he wore last night. One look, and one could tell that he was an assassin or a spy. When the time came, he would definitely end up badly. He had seen the mayor's methods from afar. His methods were extremely vicious. In comparison, Qinyu was better. He just tied him here, but didn't immediately take his life. He didn't torture him either. After weighing the pros and cons, Little Fatty decided to reveal everything in one breath. He was indeed not a good person, but he wasn't bad either. He didn't double-cross. He came here purely to make a fortune and didn't have any other ideas. He felt that something was wrong when he came here. Originally, he just thought that this cult had some power. But after investigating, he found that this cult was run by some people. Perhaps the cult leader did have some ability, but the real consul didn't have much ability. If he exposed it and collected enough evidence, it would be enough to make people afraid. If the mayor didn't want his reputation to be tarnished and become a rat hated by everyone, he had no choice but to give him a sum of money to keep his mouth shut. This was also an unspoken rule. What he wanted was this sum of money to keep his mouth shut. Of course, he was also prepared to risk his life to spread the news after he got the money. It was none of his business how many people believed it. He just did the best he could and had a clear conscience. And he also got a lot of money from it. He could run to another place and change his name and still live a carefree life. There was no need to hang himself on such a tree. No matter how flustered and exasperated the mayor was, he couldn't protect himself. By the time the mayor finished dealing with everything, he would have disappeared without a trace. He didn't have to worry about being discovered one day. He was worried that he would be caught one day. That's really just what I think. I've never done anything that's against reason and nature. You two heroes, please be magnanimous and let me go. At most, I promise that I won't appear here again. I'll leave far away and get out of here as soon as possible. Little Fatty translation had traveled extensively and thought of many things. Qinyu is so powerful that he was able to control him effortlessly. He was also very confident about the mayor. He thought of some conspiracy. Chapter 1044. Translator, Endless fantasy translation editor. Endless fantasy translation, but soon he shivered again. It would do him no good to continue thinking about it. It was better to pretend to be deaf and dumb. He could still make a living under Chinyu. The little fatty looked at Chinyu eagerly, hoping to see her nod gently. But what awaited him was only a piece of worn-out linen. This piece of worn-out linen was under the bed. He didn't know what it was used for. It looked worn out, and there were a few drops of dried blood on it. It definitely smelled bad. It covered his face just like that. The little fatty couldn't catch his breath and fainted, even if he had thought about whether he should knock himself out. That way, he wouldn't have to suffer and bear so much pressure. But he didn't expect that he would faint in this way. When he slowly woke up, it was pitch black in front of his eyes. The sky was already bright, and many people were coming along. There was a long line, and they were holding all kinds of tools for washing up. There were also many people standing outside waiting for orders. It seemed to be a very big battle. The only person in this small town who could be so generous was the mayor. If it wasn't for the previous incident, he would have suspected the mayor's intentions. But now he understood that the mayor was doing this to raise the position of the leader. By then, he would naturally be able to get more. If he raised the position of the leader, he would replace the leader. Then, wouldn't he be the one enjoying all this now? How disgusting. Shuelon could tell what he was thinking this time, but it didn't mean that she would understand. This kind of action made her feel disgusted. Although she still watched with a calm attitude, she couldn't help but want to express her opinion. If she didn't want to know what the mayor wanted to do now, the two of them were definitely not that calm. The combined strength of the two of them was enough to easily destroy this small town. Chinyu alone could wipe out and suppress, and no one could fight back. With great strength, there was nothing to be afraid of, because everything was under control. Not long after, the mayor came over. Seeing that they didn't use these, the people sent to wash them were a little surprised. There was even a hint of fear in his eyes. But after what happened last night, Shuelon knew what kind of person he was. It was precisely because everything was done perfectly on the surface. She felt a little more disgusted. If he did so well on the surface, why didn't he go to a drama troupe? Maybe he could be famous all over the world. The mayor still didn't know that he had been exposed. Now he saw that they had been here the whole time, and no one saw them to translation. Maybe he was thinking too much. It was possible that it wasn't these two people who heard his words. Or how could they be so? If it were those who did good chivalrous translation last night, they would have pointed their weapons last night. If it was someone with ulterior motives, they wouldn't have been so calm. More or less, it was time for him to reveal some of his feelings. But until now, they didn't. After thinking about it for a while, he felt that he was probably overthinking things. It was and was translation was. Was translation, indeed the smile on his face also became slightly more sincere. However, his sincerity was treated as hypocrisy. He didn't say anything to him. The mayor was happy that he didn't say anything. Anyway, these people were all in his plan. They would all die soon, even if they didn't die, as long as he got them far away. Then he could become the local overlord here, as long as they were dead in the eyes of others. With the passage of time, he might be able to develop a huge force. When the time came, he would expand one after another. As long as he could live that long, he would definitely be able to see his most glorious moment. As he thought, the smile on his face became more and more arrogant. This arrogance was a little obvious. Even if she didn't hear what he said last night, she could roughly guess it by looking at his expression. This person definitely had bad intentions. But now that she knew everything, she couldn't be bothered to do anything to him. Now, if the source of all this was the mayor, then it was fine. She would deal with the people and catch all the small fish and shrimps in one fell swoop. There would be no such scourge. The mayor of an ordinary small town could really have such ambition. Wasn't there some other reason behind this? You said that I'm the leader. Then do you know my name? The mayor didn't panic at all. Perhaps he had already thought of an excuse one day. So the moment he heard this question, he immediately blurted it out. Of course, it's the leader of the 100 Spirits sect. How can we be qualified to know the leader's real name? We only know that the leader's name is 100 Spirits. I know, the leader wants to test me, but I have long remembered the leader's name in my heart. I don't want to ask for the last time. I only hope that the leader can see my sincerity one day and give me some attention." His words were completely watertight. No one could find any fault with them. If he mentioned other details, he could also use the same words. He could vaguely muddle through. But what he said made their status even higher. These mysterious and unfathomable words made it seem like they were really the leader of the Hundred Spirits sect. They had single-handedly created the Hundred Spirits sect. They were the mysterious experts who came from a mysterious place. No one knew their origins. They only knew that they were powerful, and they would bring endless vitality to countless people and all life in the world, and a bright future. If it was someone with a weak mind, they would probably be fooled by this. He really thought that he was the leader of the Hundred Spirits sect. He enjoyed everything that belonged to the leader with a clear conscience. There was no problem with the mayor's attitude. There was no problem with everyone's attitude. He wouldn't guess if he was in danger. Instead, he was dazzled by everything in front of him. It was a pity that the person standing here now was Chinyu. The little fatty spent a lot of effort to barely escape. This was also the reason why Chinyu was able to walk relatively far. Otherwise, he definitely wouldn't have been able to escape. It wasn't easy for him to escape. He couldn't wait to run out. However, on the other side, Chinyu had immediately sensed the information that the rope had sent back. He had already escaped, but there were still many mysteries surrounding this person. Why did he come here? Why did he suddenly decide to extort the mayor? Whether or not he knew anything more, all of this needed to be considered. So this person couldn't escape. At least, he couldn't escape now. The little fatty ran far away. In the blink of an eye, he found himself back. Chapter 1045. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. How could this be? I've already walked far away. Why did I turn back? He even rubbed his eyes in disbelief, not daring to believe what he was seeing. But no matter how he looked at it, this was the room he had been trapped in for a long time, and he didn't even go out the door. The little fatty ran out again in disbelief. But he ran far, far away. In the blink of an eye, he came back again. He immediately widened his eyes. I knew it. I knew he wouldn't be unprepared. Because he's already gone, but he still left behind such a method, making it impossible for me to escape. Really. Although he said so, he was very afraid in his heart. But with such strength, it was more than enough to kill as many of him as he wanted. There might be some inexplicable method to make him tell the truth. Now he finally understood. The treatment he received before was indeed very mild. Perhaps it was because Chinyu didn't want to do anything to him. Otherwise, how could he continue to stand here unscathed and not be beheaded long ago? After all, he really had no value. He had basically said everything he could say, at least for most people. He was already worthless. He had no value at all. He was an existence that could be thrown out at any time. Leaving him behind would be a hidden danger, because if he ran away, he might say something about Chinyu. But Chinyu didn't kill him. This was already a mercy. But the little fatty was still a little unwilling to give up and was prepared to go out and try. If he could run away this time, then he would quickly find a place to hide. The farther away from here, the better, so as to avoid provoking the fiend Chinyu again. If he found himself still standing in the same place in the blink of an eye, then he might as well not run. There was no point in continuing to run. Why did he keep running? Anyway, he couldn't run away no matter what. Success or failure would only depend on this time. If he could succeed, of course, it would be excellent. If he couldn't, then he would accept his fate. I'll do what I need to do and sit here obediently, waiting for Chinyu to come back. He did not know whether or not Chinyu could hear what was happening here. Therefore, he had been talking to himself the entire time. It looked as if he had lost his mind. But in fact, he knew that he was really worried that Chinyu had some special means to monitor him. That was why he said those words. But after saying that, there was no movement. He could only do as he said and give it a try. This time, he carefully avoided everyone and even crawled through the dog hole. He ended up in a very sorry state, and then he walked outside for a long time. This time, he didn't return for a long time. He couldn't help but feel that he had seen hope. Did that mean that he didn't have to go back this time? If he could escape from this place unscathed, he must thank God and wash his hands of the golden basin after the rain. He would never do something so immoral again. He would no longer do anything like domestic violence, rape, and extortion. Just be an ordinary person. That way, he would have fewer troubles. Just as he stood outside the city proudly and was about to laugh. Suddenly, he couldn't laugh anymore, because everything in front of him had returned to how it was at the beginning. He was back again, and this time it was still very clear. It was as if everything that had happened before was just an illusion. He finally felt that there was something wrong with the hallucination. So everything that happened just now was just an illusion? But he felt that it wasn't as simple as an illusion. The little fatty looked at his body, and the marks that should have been there were still there. It was as if he had suddenly been saved. When Chinyu came back, he saw a meatball with a face full of despair. The little fatty was indeed very fat, and he looked like a big meatball. No matter where he sat, he looked like a small mountain. At this moment, he curled himself into a ball and looked even more funny. But such a funny appearance couldn't hide his cunning and his flexibility. The first impression that the fatty's body left on people was that it was cumbersome. But what he was best at was flexibility. Using his appearance to hide his true strength was the most natural disguise. Chinyu had already checked his body, and there were no traces of modification. In other words, he had always looked like this. He could be flexible and changeable, and his personality was extremely cunning. There must be something wrong with this person's background. At least it wasn't as simple as it appeared on the surface. I'll give you one last chance to tell me what you're doing here. I'm just a passerby, and I'm not interested in getting involved in your affairs. I just want to know the cause and effect. The little fatty was still a little unwilling to give up. He thought for a long time and felt that it should be an illusion, but now he was standing on Chinyu's side again. He felt that this was definitely not an illusion. After checking his surroundings again, he still couldn't see anything. He made up his mind and decided to take advantage of this opportunity to break out. He didn't believe that he would still be affected by the illusion if he ran out. But Chinyu suddenly raised his voice a little. Although it was still extremely calm, there was a hidden threat. The little fatty suddenly felt as if he was tied up by iron chains. He couldn't move at all, but there were no iron chains on his body at all, and only he felt this way. It couldn't help but remind him of before. He clearly felt that he had escaped safely, but he still felt the sense of despair in this room. This was no longer something that could be described simply as an illusion. Even the most realistic illusion definitely couldn't achieve such an effect. It was usually designed in advance. But even if someone was controlling it, it couldn't be so precise. Not a single trace of feeling was wrong. It was as if he was really tied up by heavy iron chains. I said that I heard a group of people talking about this time, so I came over. Actually, I'm also a gambler, and I squandered all the money on me in one go. So I had no choice but to do this business, which is also my old profession. If you ask me, I'm not that kind of very bad person. I'm just taking some of the benefits from these bad people. The little fatty was still defending himself at this moment. No matter how harmless he looked on the outside, it couldn't hide that he was not a simple person in essence. Just as Chinyu guessed, the little fatty's purpose of coming here was not simple. Or it could be said that the reason was deliberately controlled by someone. As for little fatty, he was only here to pay off his gambling debt. That was why he was here, and also to make more money. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.